I will call this meeting to order. Suzette, can I get roll?
Yes. Ms. Deal.
Here.
Mr. Sikich.
Present.
Mr. Keller.
Here.
Mrs. Carr.
Here.
Mr. Ustruck.
Here.
Mr. Burns.
Here.
Mrs. Justum. I believe she's on her way. And Mrs. Kaiser. Here. President Lee.
Here. All right, today we have two workshops to go through. So the first one is item 3.1, College and Career Readiness, ELA, Science, Social Studies, and Life Readiness Adoptions. Ms. Raymer?
Thank you. So this evening, we are going to be sharing, we have quite a few teachers that are going to be joining us on Zoom and a couple in person. Hi, Chris. To help share kind of some of the process that we've used around our resource adoption for the spring. And part of this was Caitlin and I having some conversations around us having some availability within this year's budget that we wanted to be sure we spent on resources that will support our teachers as well as resources that get into the hands of our learners. And it had been, as we started the process, we think like 17 years since we adopted an ELA resource, was the last anybody could track it back to, which is a super long time not to have a core resource for 4K through 5th grade ELA. And so that's kind of where we started. And then the more we looked into it, 612 Science has some things that haven't been touched. We have an anatomy book that is over 20 years old. I think we've learned a few things about the human body in the last 20 years that maybe we want to make sure are more up to date than our current resource. And then as well as we haven't looked at all the areas of social studies. So all of those things combined started our committees kind of going. And so I led the 4K through 5th grade ELA adoption. Steve Carr led our 6th through 12 social studies adoption. Adam Hengel led our 6th through 12 science adoption. He's not here tonight as he is on vacation. And then Ann Locke and Diane Lazarides also led an adoption for a new progress monitoring tool. We have been using MAPS as our progress monitoring tool for many, many years, and we are starting to find that we've sort of plateaued with the data that it's giving us. And we wanted something that had more real live time data that could progress monitor for us a little bit better than a couple of times a year. So we've investigated quite a few resources, and that team will share their recommendation for that resource tonight as well. So a little bit to go through kind of our process. We always start with our teams with our why. So we always review our mission and our vision with our teams, as well as our strategic plan. So we start with kind of what are the things in our strategic plan that we're looking to hit at, and how do the resources that we own or adopt align to what's in our strategic plan. Then we look at our equity non-negotiables or our equity belief statements and really look at, especially when we're looking at curricular adoptions, the one that reads the deeper learning competencies, mastering academic content, problem solving and critical thinking, communication, collaboration, being self-directed, and having an academic mindset will drive instructional planning to increase equitable opportunities for all students. So that's one that we really need to pay attention to when it comes to adopting a core resource. We don't really want something that's intended to be a lockstep curriculum that's purchased by a company. We really want something that our teachers can use flexibly to meet the needs of the learners that we serve each day. And then eliminating inequities begins with each of us. We see our students as people with assets and aspirations, and it is our job to help them realize their goals and dreams. And that one really speaks to the fact that we serve a wide variety of learners in our district, from students who are several years behind academically for one reason or another to students that are several years ahead academically for one reason or another. And so we want to be sure that when we're adopting a core resource, it's not designed for just one section of our population. It's really designed to meet the needs of the broad gamut of our population. And then we go through a lot of talk about our deeper learning competencies and what do these actually mean to us as a committee or as a group. For our ELA resource and for the other resources, we started with the questions on, do our current resources align to our why? So if we go back to our vision and our mission statement, do our current resources that we own right now for 4K through 5th grade ELA, for 6th grade through 12th grade science, for 6th grade through 12th grade social studies, and for progress monitoring, do they align to our why? And we had a resounding no to that question for most of the current products that we have. And then we talked a lot about what is one resource you need as an instructor that you do not yet have. Like, what is the tool that you're missing when it comes to trying to do some of our deeper learning work? And for a lot of our teachers, the tools that we're missing were some progress monitoring tools. The tools that we're missing were resources that are adaptable enough in the moment to use them for a broad range of students versus having to teach a whole lesson and then go back later to try to close a gap or to try to do some acceleration. We wanted to be sure we had a resource that has all of those scaffolds embedded in them so that we can meet the needs of the learners at any given moment in time. So that led us to a lot of discussion about a GVC. And what is a GVC? It's a guaranteed and viable curriculum. Guaranteed means all students have the same opportunity. Viable means it can be completed, what we put in there, in a year. And curriculum is where we connect the standards to the resources and cover the content in that area. What it does for us at GVC is it sets the floor. It sets the common expectation of the power standards, the core competencies, and the essential questions by course, by semester. It should be aligned to the use of our core resource. So we should never be saying, like, we teach and then name a resource for ELA or for science or for social studies. We teach the children who come to us each day in our classrooms. We utilize the resources to meet their needs and make sure that they're hitting at the guaranteed and viable curriculum. And then a guaranteed and viable curriculum provides equal opportunity to learn by making sure that we've embedded the correct scaffolds into it to meet that wide range of learners that we serve each day. The ceiling is wherever the ceiling ends up. There isn't really a ceiling. It's wherever within the curriculum, within the content that we're able to serve with students every day, that our learners take it. And that's what a lot of the deeper learning work allows us to do, is not set a stopping point for any learner. But we do have to hold certain standards in common in order to ensure we aren't creating gaps at different schools at different times. So we keep our GVC documents all together in here. And I will just pull up one of these so that you can see what it looks like. Whoops. Oh, Brandon is still logged in. Let's see if I can't get this one to open. Hold on, let me just switch out of Brandon's account. There we go. They're all organized by the I CAN statement that's addressed. What was the Common Core State Standard that created that I CAN statement that goes on to the elementary report card? What's the academic vocabulary that is embedded within that I CAN statement? What are the resources that we currently own that align to teaching that one? And then what would the demonstration of mastery look like for that I CAN statement? So we have these documents for K-5 ELA, and this one is very complex because it has learner profiles for the areas of ELA that we serve, which are literature, informational text, foundational skills, writing, speaking and listening, and communication. And then for each one of these, it has, what is the first grade learner profile look like? What do we want a reader and a writer to look like and feel like in first grade, in second grade, and third grade, and in fourth grade? And it is not that we want to limit our students to any one grade level, but there has to be some checkpoints at each grade level. Otherwise, we don't actually make the progress we need to towards keeping the kids on track as they get older. And then for each one, similar to the last one, the resource is actually set up to be key ideas. All right, I'm gonna pull this one up. The I CAN statement, where it came from, what it looks like at every grade level. The exemplars of mastery are ones that this is still a work in progress for us, and we're adding those as we get through. And then what are the resources we currently support as a district in order to get at that I CAN statement, in order to get at those levels of mastery? So we spent quite a bit of time developing these documents so that we had a place to be able to say, if those are the standards we're really trying to master, how do we be sure that our resources align to those standards? And we asked the question at one of our first meetings, how many resources should we have for ELA? So when we go to, these are the resources we have to teach that I can statement, how many should we have? And 29 out of 30 people on the committee said 0 to 5. One said 10 plus. And then we asked the question, how many do you think we use now? And people asked if I could put a bigger scale to it because 10 probably didn't define it. So we are using so many different resources. It really does explain where we have all kinds of splinter skills and interesting gaps across our district. It's interesting how it explains where we have some acceleration in particular areas and we have a deficit in other areas. And there's been some recent legislation changes that around the land of dyslexia and having tools to identify dyslexia and embedding more phonics instruction into our resources across our district in K4 through 5th grade. And we do not have a consistent phonics resource that we are using across our schools. So one of the things that was really important to us when we started looking at resources was making sure that we got one that had the necessary phonics support to it for our youngest learners, but also carried forward and had phonics support for older students as well. We are mobile, as we all know, and we frequently have students who move into our district in the upper grades who still need help with some of the phonics pieces. And a lot of the resources assume that anything past 2nd grade and you can stop teaching those skills. So therefore, it was harder to find one that still embedded a lot of those phonics-based skills as students got older. So these were the guiding principles that our team of teachers came up with that we really wanted to be sure that any resource that we suggested met. It has to be flexible in use. It has to meet a minimum expectation, but have so many opportunities to grow from there. It has to be culturally relevant and reflective of the learners that we serve each day. It has to include all scaffolds, so all acceleration and any remediation necessary within that unit, so we're not creating so many gaps along the way. It has to provide good professional development and a lot of support for our teachers. We know that we have a younger teaching staff and we tend to hire people newer to the profession, and so we wanted to be sure that it not only has good professional development to get us started, but also ongoing professional development. A tool that's as broad as some of the ones we looked at, you really don't, nobody's gonna master how to use it in the first 2 sessions of PD. You know enough to get you started, and then you keep coming back and expanding on what's in there. And then the last one that was really important to the team was that whatever we chose was backed by research. So we did a lot of research, and we looked at ed reports, and it will tell you which resources align to Common Core state standards. It will tell you which resources best align, which ones are more culturally relevant. It tells you a lot of information. So we immediately started there and said we're gonna eliminate anything that doesn't score in the green, like in the highly recommended, for being culturally responsive, culturally relevant, as well as flexible of use, and that it aligns to Common Core state standards. And it was surprising as we looked at some of the resources that are pretty well known, that a couple of them didn't meet some of that criteria. They fell in the yellow or even in the red for some of the criteria we were looking at. So we narrowed it down to 2 choices based on all of that research. And the team has been spending the last couple of weeks really diving in and investigating these 2 resources. We started with both Wonders, which is a McGraw-Hill product, and Scholastic. Wonders, the team felt, was really more tied to units, so not quite as flexible. It had more of a basal type reader still, like a textbook anthology piece to it versus individual text that you could put into kids' hands and more guided reading materials. It was less text in the hands of students. They really liked, most of the team really liked the writing resources, and Wonders had a really good PD plan, and they felt that the resources were culturally relevant. But Scholastic, for the team, was super flexible. So that is the one that they felt really could be much more adaptable to the needs of our learners and the skill set of our staff. Tons and tons and tons of text in the hands of kids. And we know that that is especially if you're serving students who come from backgrounds of economic disadvantage. You want text, as much of it, in their hands as often as you can get it there. The team really liked the writing resources from Scholastic. They felt very strongly that the phonics resources were much better from Scholastic than they were from Wonders. And they felt that Scholastic was equally as culturally relevant as was Wonders. So with that, let's see if I can pull up the Zoom now. Okay, there we go. So now we have a group of our teachers who participated in the trial and error and the process with us on the screen, and we're just going to take some turns kind of talking about the resources that we investigated and why as a team we are leaning towards Scholastic. So Cheryl, do you want to start?
I can start.
Oh, okay, go ahead. I was muted. Go ahead.
No, go ahead, Cheryl.
Okay, basically, well, two things that jumped to me was, because our kids have been virtual and we have been blessed with super amazing resources and technology today for sure, and thank goodness for the last year, but these kids need books in their hands and they need hands-on with a good technology program. And we felt like Scholastic really offered both of those. It has a really awesome technology component for the kids, but it also it's going to come with thousands of books. And that is really, for me, a good, just was awesome because these kids we need books. That was one of the most exciting things when I got back to school, was sitting with my kids in a reading group, even though we were socially distanced, but they all got to have a real book in their hands. And it was just like, so wonderful. And also, Deidre also talked about the research-based, and I teach a class at UWM, which is assessing and teaching young children literacy. And actually the books I use, those authors worked on this curriculum. So I feel really good about the authors of this curriculum and what the research that they back for young children for reading. And it just makes me feel confident in this program. So those were two definite huge points for me for Scholastic, for sure.
And Cheryl, can you tell the board what school you are at and what is the grade level you teach this year?
Anybody else?
Oh, Cheryl, did you hear
Yeah,
that?
I'll jump in. I second
You're
that.
muted.
Getting books in the hands of kids is so huge. So that research library and having so many titles at the ready for them to have those books in hands will be great. Whether you have a group of kids at a level M for a long period of time, it takes a lot to get out of an M level book. So having just a bunch of guided readers at that level for them will be really helpful. And then I also think on the tech side, I noticed when McGraw-Hill, when they pulled up Wonders, it looked a lot like My Math, which has been great on the smartboard for me to pull up and go through the lessons on the teacher end, but not as easy for the students to use and log in and try and do those on their iPads. So I was a little bit nervous when I saw that looked the same. So I'm hoping to avoid kind of how that platform worked on the iPads for our kids.
And Karen, and then we'll go back to Cheryl. Can you please let the board know which school you are working at right now and what grade level you have this year?
Sure. I am a teacher at Walker Elementary, and I teach a first, second, and third grade classroom.
And I am at Jefferson, and I teach first grade.
Thank you. Melissa, do you want to jump in?
Sure. I was just going to say that I agree with what everyone said, especially just the wonderful literature, the culturally relevant literature. I felt like a lot of the books, looking through them in Scholastic, like our kids can really see themselves in those books. And that meant a lot to me when we were looking through resources. And I also felt like they were so engaging. Just in working with kind of both the programs at school, the kids definitely seem more engaged with the Scholastic books. It was kind of harder to get them a little engaged with the more of the Basil anthology type reader in the Wonders. But yeah, just that really strong literature. And I really liked also the the beginning reading skills that they're going to be working on in the Scholastic as well.
And
So-
Melissa, can you remind us what
Oh,
school
sorry.
and what's your role?
I'm the reading specialist, and I'm at Pershing School.
Thank you. All right, and Caitlin?
Sure. I am a reading specialist at Wilson, and I agree with what everyone's been saying so far. I think the authentic text that Scholastic offers will really be engaging for our students. And I also like that it incorporates writing, phonics, and reading, all kind of the components of balanced literacy will all be connected and better aligned than using separate resources for each.
Awesome. And Kelly?
Yes, so I do special education at Pershing. I'm working with K4 through second grade. And one of the things that I really liked about the Scholastic program was the flexibility with the consumables, like the workbooks. They weren't specifically tied to one text. So you have that flexibility of using a different text for a different concept, and just kind of having more options when you are teaching a certain subject or a certain focus. So, yeah.
Awesome. And Sue?
Hi, I'm Sue Hebert. I'm the reading teacher at Irving. And we had a few teachers try Wonders. They were interns that are now long-term subs in the first, second grade. And we tried to get the Wonders technology going and had some difficulty with that, like I've heard before. And then the fourth grade teacher, and they felt that some of the content was too high for the kids. They tried a couple of lessons and it didn't really match with where the kids were at. And then the fourth grade teacher using Scholastic really loved the flexibility. She said that there were excerpts from high interest chapter books for their shared reading. It complements PBL, project-based learning, deeper thinking, and inquiry-based instruction. She was really happy with all of that. And as I was just trained at the Children's Dyslexia Center last year, and I'm just so excited to see a comprehensive phonics and word study and vocabulary embedded in this as well. And the online platforms look excellent. And I think the kids are really going to benefit from that phonemic awareness and the phonics embedded in with the high interest books. So I'm super excited to see this happening.
If it's okay with board members, we'll let the rest of the team share and then we'll grab questions so that we can get a wide variety of answers. Thank you. Kelly?
Hi, I'm Kelly Fult. I teach 4th and 5th grade at Pershing. And really just to back up, what to me was the biggest draw was the engagement. In 4th and 5th grade, it can sometimes be very difficult, especially if a child has struggled with reading over the years, to find text that they're actually interested in reading. And you will sometimes have children who are spending a whole reading block just looking for a book to read. When I got the Scholastic materials delivered, it was like the excitement of a Scholastic book fair in my room. Kids were so excited to look at those books and they wanted to read. And honestly, that's one of my biggest struggles throughout the years, is trying to get kids wanting to read. So I just thought that all of the diverse text that Scholastic has really draws in the engagement, which is huge for kids.
Awesome. And Diane?
I'm Diane Statza. I am a reading specialist at Jefferson. And one of the things that really stuck out to me was the scaffolding that was offered with Scholastic. And for one example, what they had pointed out when they introduced all the program to us was that for the word study, they've got a placement test that personalizes then a learning path for the kids. And then kind of like Achieve had done, all students get introduced to the same vocab, but at their appropriate text level. So everybody has access to those words, but it's at a level that they can access it. So I really liked that. And also with the Lit Pro, they get to choose the books that they want to read. And we know that when kids get to choose the books that interest them, that they are more likely to read it and to understand it. So those were two huge points that I really liked. And I do agree with everything that everybody else said too.
Thanks.
So.
And Becky?
I am Becky Grease. I am currently the assistant principal at Madison. And as the Madison teachers were kind of looking through the Scholastic materials, one of the big things that they shared with me was the flexibility that they'll be able to use it within their project-based learning units, pull in the text that they are wanting to use based on their unit, but that the resources that are used there will be very beneficial to them. And it's teacher friendly. And so I think whenever we're looking at something, we want something that teachers are going to be able to use immediately because it is so friendly for them and how it's laid out.
And one of the things that the teachers really spent, and we had about 30 teachers all together. So we had each and every elementary school represented. We had some GCT staff on the team. We had reading specialists on the team, our teachers who work with our EL department we had on the team, classroom teachers, our teachers who work with students with special needs, because we wanted to be sure that we weren't looking at a resource that just had a narrow focus. And the one thing that was a resounding yes was how badly we need a resource for our students right now. And as we looked at the resources that we had the chance to review and the ones that we had a chance to look at, it became glaringly obvious where we had some gaps in some of the materials we were using right now. And that is from some of our, we have amazing, amazing instructors in West Dallas, West Milwaukee, and the teachers that are on the screen right now, super amazing, talented individuals who looked at some of these resources, and one of their first responses was, do you have any idea of how much time I'm spending right now to put together materials that will suddenly be together for me in one spot? And it is nodding from even the science and the social studies team right now as well. Which is not to say that they're not willing to put in that kind of work, and sometimes that's what you have to do if you really want to personalize learning, but to watch a tool that removes some of that time investment from a talented instructor who just needs one particular item on inferencing for 3 students has been pretty awe-inspiring for these guys as they watched how quickly they could get their hands on the tools they really need for each and every learner. So that was a big part of it. And then the connectivity between the phonics instruction, the writing instruction, and the reading instruction, that every piece of reading material had writing components to it so that you're constantly coupling the two, was something that the team gave a ton of feedback on that was super, super helpful. So questions on ELA from our board members? Kristen?
I just want to make sure I didn't miss it. Are there interactive read alouds through 5th or 6th grade, or is it just for the younger ones?
Yes, there are interactive read alouds all the way through, and then on top of that, we also have purchased the Best Friends collection, which is a different Scholastic product that does fall in love with a book, and so it has interactive read alouds that you do all the time.
Okay.
Any other questions from board members on our ELA? Yeah, Dave?
Okay, so when you talk about the writing connection, are we talking about responding to writing, or are we talking about writing a narrative or an informative piece, or is this more of a writing about what you've read?
I can answer that, or if somebody
Okay.
else on the team wants to answer it, who played around with the materials. Kelly, go ahead.
So what I noticed is a lot of the reading materials do have a focus on writing about reading in the upper grades. It within the reading component, but then the writing does have the narrative, the opinion, all of those core writing units. So there's really both. It's just that writing about reading is more focused on in the reading materials from what I saw.
Okay, but it does have a separate writing component to it as well.
Yes. Yeah,
Okay.
it has comprehensive writing
Okay.
to it as well as comprehensive reading. It just had far better response to reading as well as embedded opportunities to practice what you're doing in writing right along with the text in that really interconnected way that currently our hodgepodge of resources does not allow for quite as easily.
Okay. I need a little bit more information about how this works with project-based learning. Is there any way you could give me an example or talk to me about anybody that has piloted maybe something where you started a PBL unit and you used this resource?
I don't know that we're gonna find anybody that was doing those hand in hand, given our timing, but Becky,
Okay.
do you wanna talk a little bit around the team at Madison who primary method of instruction is project-based learning, where they saw that they would be using this resource within their planning?
Yeah, so the nice thing about the Scholastic is it is set up into units, and those units could easily be connected to a project-based learning unit based on the themes that are present. But the other nice thing is that there's flexibility within the standards are there with like graphic organizers and things that you would use when you're planning your reading instruction. But you as the teacher, if you're doing a unit, I'm just trying to think of one off the top of my head. I have a group right now doing a newspaper writing unit. They could easily work the text in based on what they're already doing, and then use those graphic organizers that are based on the standards that would sort of complement the work that they're doing. And it's not them then trying to create everything from scratch, but it also provides them with the standard-based instruction that they would need.
Also, one thing that I really noticed was any of the materials aren't like geared towards a specific text. So if you have, let's say, a graphic organizer, it is more generically done so that if you were doing a unit of study and you wanted to, pursue something in project-based learning, you could use the materials with much more flexibility than we saw in Wonders, where Wonders, it was very text specific. So, I mean, that was really, really important for me. Jane, coming from kind of that reading background, I did have some trepidation going to, a core resource, but this really, really has the flexibility. It's based on the balanced instruction model. The writing component was, there is the opportunity to do multiple types of writing, along with, I thought it was really important that there was some grammar included, kind of back to the 6-trait writing kind of components. So, and I think that's been a missing piece, over the past couple of years. So there was a lot of components that we've been doing kind of, bits and pieces, where this is all within one core resource. Yet again, it's got that flexibility piece into it. So, again, I thought it was the best resource to look at this point too.
Okay, so will we still use like a Fontes and Pinnell system? Will there be, leveled text, and will there be multiple copies?
Yes, that's a super exciting part that you'll watch some of their faces light up. And we do have part of a book room set up in the other room if after the meeting anybody wants to check it out.
Sure.
I'm sure all of you would be dying to get your hands into what a guided reading library looks like, but actually some of you probably would.
Guilty.
Or run screaming.
But we have set up right now 2 of the shelves that it comes with. And the resource itself comes with a ton of embedded level text, a ton of choice text, and that's where it helps with project-based learning. But on top of that, with this resource, we would be buying a leveled book room for every single one of our elementary schools. And so it has a super wide variety of text, leveled A through Z. And then it also has something called the leveled book room Accelerator. Each set of leveled text, multiple copies of every single one, comes with a teaching card that tells you which standards are embedded to that particular set of G readers versus which standards would be embedded with this particular set of another leveled reader. And then the leveled book room, what it will do is you can type it in, it's an app, and you can type in, I need a H level book that really teaches inferencing at a high level, and it'll just tell you which set to pick. So that's where it would save our teachers a ton of time, because right now what they're doing is, I have 3 H readers and they need to work more on inferencing, and they're gonna read through all the H level random books that we have in a book room and hopefully find 4 H level readers that actually hit at inferencing, or they're going to add a bazillion other skills to, trying to find other things to match the skill. And so that's the challenge with what we're doing right now. This just makes that process a lot easier and a lot more targeted to get at exactly what the kids want and need. Plus, it offers a ton of text choice as well.
Okay, so can you talk about like is there a technology component? So, for example, the delivery of a lesson, like in my math, how you can use those, the slideshow or whatever. Is that a part of this? Is there for the shared lesson? And then is there any technology that students would be using on their iPads with this? And what about, where does Lexia fit into it?
So I'll let one of the teachers, anybody can jump in on that one, kind of answer the questions on what the technology resources look like. Go ahead, Sue.
Yeah, so looking at the technology pieces that the students use, I can talk to that. There are 3 different platforms, and really is exciting because there is one called Word, which is specifically for vocabulary, multiple meaning words, synonyms, antonyms, and part of the reading connection. To be a strong reader, you need the language part and the decoding, and that word study and that vocabulary is just as important as the decoding. So if you multiply those 2, that is what makes, to show where you are, how good of a reader you are. So that I'm extremely excited to see that there's that one, the Word, it's called Word. And it says digital game-based vocabulary instruction built around 2,500 word families that make up 90% of texts. Our kids need to have those words and that knowledge of words. Then there's the foundational skills for students in pre-K through 2. So that's, more that Lexia kind of has vocabulary and that, but this is specifically for those beginning foundational skills, which are so necessary for them to get that decoding and that fluency by learning those patterns and practicing. And those, again, they're all based on, I think they take initial tests and then it will place them where they belong and personalized for them. And then teachers also get the data from all of these platforms. Then there's the Literacy Pro, which is that accountable, independent reading and learning delivered through that student-selected ebooks and print text with comprehension checks. So I'm super excited to see all of those platforms that are going to allow our kids to practice those skills and give teachers data to use as well. And it will tell them, like, here's a group of kids that might fit together for a small group based on some needs that they show. So again, that Literacy Pro with authentic texts that they're going to choose to read, and then that digital platform with the vocabulary, and then the foundational skills as well. Are just, I think, very exciting for us to have those different areas for kids to use on their iPads.
And so, Jane, to answer the second half of your question, so Lexia, we prepaid a contract, so we have Lexia through next year, which also allows us a little bit of an overlap to kind of you still have a resource for students while we're learning. You're hearing about a very wide variety of tools that no teacher is going to be able to learn how to use all of in a short order of time. And so it allows us some time to really develop our skills and making sure we're using all of the platforms. It also replaces a few things that we're otherwise purchasing in addition, like Lexia, which we're spending additional dollars on, like Achieve that we're spending additional dollars on, like Raz Kids that we're spending additional dollars on, and you really used it to its fullest extent. So there's rarely can kids go in there and find something they haven't previously read. Not that not rereading text is super important lots of times, but if that's a choice-free read time, we need new text into our kids' hands so that they have the opportunities within there.
Did you want to go, Kristen?
Yeah, quick question. My question was, have we seen the data that this program will support MAP? I know I'm a teacher as well that has also been the whole, like, you're pulling every resource together. And my school works with F&P, so if it's similar to that, then I'm happy with it. I just want to kind of hear that, as someone has looked into, ultimately we want our kids college and career ready at that percentile. Have we seen the data showing that it's going to get us there?
Yeah, that was the only hesitation we had with scholastic literacy as a comprehensive program is it is newer to the market. And so they have a ton of efficacy and shared a bunch of data from some districts that used it last year that had some excellent outcomes. Their writing components are newer. So their reading components, there was long-standing data that showed how well some of those pieces work. The writing components, again, not as much data because it was just started last year, but that was, we really wanted to make sure that we felt like it had all the right components to get us there, that teachers are kind of putting together right now in a lot of cases to do the same thing.
Okay, thank you so much.
Jane, did you have more questions?
Just a couple. So, talk to me about, and I don't think that workbooks are a bad thing at all. So I want to just say that. But can you talk to me a little bit about the consumable workbook and how you see that as part of this? What was your take on it, on the actual consumables?
I'll let anybody jump in who wants to on that one.
I can jump in to start. I don't know if other people have other things to say, but I know one thing that that comes within the consumables are those graphic organizers. So instead of running copies, they're just part of the resource that you're gathering. I know within the kindergarten one, that's when I really looked at. There's books that kids can create, so that they're creating their own books that are already color copied, which I think is something sometimes we don't get in their hands. They're usually black and white when they're making them. Mm-hmm. So to me, they were resources that teachers are already just making copies of that they're finding on their own. And this way now it's all within one resource that they just have at their fingertips.
Right. Okay.
Well, and I think it's so important too that we view it as a resource. We're not using it as a workbook per se, going page by page by page.
Right.
We're truly using, the bits and pieces that we need to make sure that the students in front of us get what they need. So, it's a different view versus going through like an old-fashioned traditional kind of basal workbook kind of piece versus truly using it, again, as a resource to benefit our kids.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I looked a little bit at the kindergarten, I think the second grade one, and I just felt like it supported the lessons. I don't think it's something you necessarily would even use every day, but it's something that where the kids can get paper, they can get a pencil in their hand and practice some of that phonics stuff, which is also supported through the technology platforms. But, we want them to have a pencil in their hand sometimes, not just their finger on a screen. So I think it provided like a balance of both of those with having a little bit of the consumables. But I agree, it's like just a part of the program, but we just felt like it was really important.
It's exciting. That's good. I'm good for now.
Does anyone else have any questions? Brendan?
Yeah. When you're looking at these programs, what metrics did we use to evaluate how culturally relevant the program was? And how does Scholastic demonstrate that cultural relevance for our district?
One of the places that it gets vetted, I'll start with that, and then I'll let you guys talk about just the experience of being in the text, is on that EdWorks. And so that's where there is a research company that goes in and investigates and gives you some backing on whether or not they would deem something to be culturally responsive or culturally relevant. So we started with that, and then I will let you guys talk about just the experience of being in the text and the wide variety of text that was embedded within the resource.
Yeah, I guess I'll talk. I think if you do get a chance and you look back in the library back there, you'll notice right away, you can see they're just very culturally relevant. A lot of cultures are represented. And I really think, in working at Pershing with the kids there, the kids have loved the books that came in. Kelly, the 4th and 5th grade teacher, mentioned that before, but they were so engaged. They were so into the books that came in. They saw themselves in a lot of the text. So I really felt like it was very culturally relevant. I don't know how I'm sure everyone else felt the same, but it did a great job.
And it also kind of was pretty glaringly obvious to the team when they looked at these resources, how lacking the resources that we currently put in front of our students are at their present moment to be representative of the demographic that we serve each day.
I also see in one of the texts here that I'm even looking at, it has a list of all the authentic texts in grade 2. So it goes through and lists the read alouds, the writing workshop mentor text, the small group leveled readers. It's got a list of a very long list, independent learning. It goes through and just talks about all the different authentic, culturally relevant texts that are in just those types, the mentor texts, the read alouds, the small group leveled readers. So it does kind of list those in the one that I'm looking at.
And I will also share that several of the other districts that they gave as references are demographically very similar to ours, so that are responding very well to the use of the resource.
Okay.
Any other questions? I had a few. First and foremost, for this adoption, we talked about the flexibility that this has for where our learners are at. When it comes to the GCT, is there options as far as, are you just simply moving people up into higher levels of reading and writing as far as what their grade level may or may not be? Or is there things that are specifically geared towards students that are in a particular grade that might be a little bit more advanced in reading or writing?
I can address that one, unless one of the teachers wants to address that one. No, yes, it has extension activities embedded throughout. And so it just allows students to go deeper or take something farther or go onto a more investigative inquiry path on their own. The part of what we really liked about this, and kind of some of the struggles occasionally with some of the resources we have, like MyMath, is it is really hard to be multi-age and using that resource, because you're logging out of one platform and into another platform, and you have to log as the teacher, you're logging out of one to log in for some of the kids, and vice versa. And this had that flexibility, but it doesn't just simply move kids up grade levels, it just increases the complexity of the text and the deepness and the richness of the inquiry-based work that goes with it.
Okay, so based off that, we should be able to meet our learners where they are with more flexibility within the classroom. So,
Correct.
I mean, I saw one teacher teaching a 1, 2, 3. That's a lot of different things that one teacher has to worry about covering between people that need more help, people that need more challenge, and then across 3 different grades. So this resource should be able to support that with more ease than we have currently.
Definitely. It's going to remove quite a bit of the time that the teachers take to do that now, because it provides some of that backup of the resource. And then again, still our talented instructors know that they're not using it lockstep exactly as it's been recommended. They're filtering through those resources to create the pathway with the student that's right for them.
Okay. The second question I had was regarding PD. So I know in the one Wonder, it was listed as fantastic PD, and there was not a mention of PD for this one. So do we feel that this resource will provide the PD necessary for our staff to be able to utilize it to the best of its ability?
Yeah, that's a great question. Part of that was I could only fit so many things on the slide before the presentation.
Okay.
It was 18 slides long. So my fault for leaving that one off. But I did have a call with their PD specialist today to make sure that it is professional development that is going to be comprehensive enough for our teachers. And how it comes kind of set within the package is 66 half days. So each school, all 11 schools, get 6 half days. One of them's focused on whole group instruction, small group instruction, and they really walk through the balanced instruction model, how to use the digital resources. What I talked to them today about was we have lots of our instructors who maybe don't need a half day on how to use these resources for whole group instruction. So they'll tailor a lot of it more to the needs of the staff at each school site. And then today I talked to them about using some Title II dollars to add a coaching plan as well, where what some of their PD specialists actually come to us and do either coaching in our classrooms or coaches with our coaches to be sure that we have sustainable professional development over time. And then help us make sure, because a lot of times what you do a lot of PD to learn how to use a tool, but then once you start using it, that's actually when you have all the questions. So you think you got all your questions answered when you're looking at it in July, and then in October, it's in front of you with your learners, and you actually usually end up with more questions than you had when you first looked at it. So they will come back around with those half days throughout the year, as well as that's when the first coaching session would be, is once we've had our hands on it long enough to either have questions about how to keep going or are a little bit more confused than we thought we would be, and we can get all that clarified before we get too far down the road.
Okay. All right. My next question is for all the wonderful staff that have been gracious with their time here tonight. If this was something that we adopted moving forward for our ELA for our learners, do you see any concerns? Do you have any concerns if we had to use this? I mean, we used our last one for 17 years. So if we had to use this one for another 17 years, do you have any concern that you might see about, upkeeping it or updating it or use for staff or things that you were like, man, I think this might be something we have to evaluate in 3 years' time or consider in X amount of time? Is there anything that you can think of that you want to let us know about? Sorry, it's an out-of-the-box question, but I'm an out-of-the-box person, so. Because for me, I'm thinking, this is a huge expense, right? And we don't do this very often. And so if there's things that we can think about now that we need to think about as we move forward with this process, I think it's good to know and to understand now. And if you don't have an answer now, that's great. But if you think of one, if you could bring it to Deidre, I'd appreciate that.
Yeah, I think, no, the only thing that came up as a question from the team as far as sustainability is getting our hands on the consumables on a regular basis. And so that was the one thing that came up, is we've had a tendency in the past to purchase a core resource and then not really support it by keeping the consumables refreshed or doing some of those pieces. So the contract for this one for 6 years includes all of those pieces plus all of the updates to the things that are the platform. So more text getting added, different things changing, that all is included in the resource adoption.
Okay, that's good. And then at 6 years point, we have to then reevaluate that?
Yes.
Okay. So the last question I have is how much?
I thought maybe somebody would have that question. So the core resource adoption, so that every single classroom has access to the wide variety of the Scholastic materials, is about $800,000, which is about what we figured that it would be. We thought somewhere between $700,000 and $800,000. And then with this adoption, those leveled book rooms, they're about $48,000 a piece, but that's a one-time purchase. So you buy one for each school, and they last you for years and years and years and years and years. So that is a one-time purchase. I was just telling Marty before, they are actually 10% off this month. If we get our purchase in before the end of the month, we'll end up with one of those leveled book rooms for free. So we are working on that with the rep as we speak right now. So that'd be a one-time expense, and the sum in total is just under $1.2 million.
$1.2 million, okay.
We started with the big one. The rest of the ones we're going to talk about tonight are far less expensive than that.
Okay. I mean, divided by 17 years, it's a deal, right? I mean,
That 800,000 is not per year, correct? It's just a purchase for the
That's
six
a
for the 6
one-time
year.
For 6 years,
Got it,
yes.
okay.
Yeah.
I want to make sure we all knew that.
Yes, no, that is not a reoccurring purchase. I think Caitlin would not be very happy to hear that that's what we were thinking.
She's got tons of money.
Yeah, and Caitlin and I have already had the discussion around getting our curricular resources, since we're out of sequence anyway, back in line so that we can make sure that we're projecting our budget for the ones that we need, right? So we never want 2 in a year that are expensive. We'll have 4K through 5th grade math. That last time we adopted was about $500,000. 6 through 12 ELA was $600,000, right? So we're trying to figure out that balance of never having 2 of those very large expenses because they see so many students ever in the same year, and wherever we can not have those be back-to-back years. So that's what we all get on a cycle together going forward, just so as Caitlin plans for the budget, then we're doing that in a way that fiscally makes more sense as far as predictability and sustainability from the resources that our teachers need and our students deserve.
Jane?
So Deidre, I think this is probably a question for you. So we've said, great things about Scholastic. We know that it's going to be a huge expense, but we know that it sounds like it's very comprehensive and we're on board. Let's say we adopt it. What will be our stance about teachers or schools or principals that say, yeah, we're going to choose not to do that. We've got a good thing going here and it's working for our kids. And I feel like I need to know if we're going to make this mandatory for use. And I'm not saying we don't use any other resources, of course, but I feel, especially when new teachers come in, like this is our resource and this is what we provide. And I kind of want some assurance from you that we're going to use it.
Yeah, it is a struggle to even attempt to say that we have a GVC or a guaranteed and viable curriculum if we're using 10 plus resources for ELA across our district. And that's been a big part of what the work that we did with our leadership team and then with the teacher team that's been on this adoption, to realize that more is not better when it comes to some of this. Comprehensive is better, right? One resource that really has most of what you need. You're never going to find something that says, I can use this one thing to teach ELA for 4K through 5th grade forever and ever and ever. You're always going to need a few things here and there that are supplemental.
Right.
But we have entirely too many. And it's creating that odd spike in some of the data that we're producing when it comes to our students being college and career ready, where we're seeing spikes in weird grades, and we're seeing one school go up one year and down the next year, and we're not seeing some consistent growth with some of what we've been doing. And it is because we are a little all over the place when it comes to what the resources are that we rely on. So it is the expectation that this is the core resource going forward. And that will provide the appropriate professional development and the right number of materials, because that's also been something in the past that we've struggled with. Is we train some of the teachers and expect them to train other teachers, or we buy materials without the proper training for teachers. And so we wanted to be sure we were choosing something that the professional development is sustainable so that we can keep coming back to it.
Okay.
Any other questions? If not, I want to thank everyone for their time regarding this, not only just being here tonight, but for the evaluation of these things. I understand it takes a lot of time and effort and expertise that I do not possess to be able to do this. So thank you very much for that. I feel this resource is extremely important. Reading and writing is going to open up the doorway to every other subject for our learners. And at this level, it's really critical to get those foundational pieces in place so that they can continue moving forward and be successful in our district. So thank you very much for that, Deidre, and your team and all of the staff that worked and tried out these two different resources. So thank you.
And now we're going to transition it over to, you're going to go next, Steve, social studies? Okay. Social studies is not all the subjects, so hopefully this one will be a little quicker.
So I was told that I have about 70 minutes or so to cover this topic, so hang on tight, Heather. Appreciate your hanging in there. No, this should take a much shorter amount of time. The social studies experience in this adoption cycle went in two different sections, and I'm going to try to get the, come on.
You hit present. Even the top right corner.
Got it, okay. I'll just slide. So we have, obviously we're not going to go back through the GVC documents, and the copyright document that I have here. I was going to go through it, but it's really just the way that we decided which high school text resources really were way out of date. And we had an econ text that the last adoption was in 1999. So it was due for an evaluation of what is is going to be most recent, current, and relevant. So those are the two of the defining documents that we have in this process. As we got into, and so Heather, if you could hang on there for a little bit, I'm going to talk first about what we did with our 6th through 8th social studies group. And on that team, we had 7 teachers who were with us throughout the fairly lengthy experience of going through really analyzing what we wanted to accomplish in having a new resource. Really, and to backtrack just a little bit, really, how are we going to use this as a resource rather than as the entire curriculum? Because frankly, our teachers have done a wonderful job of making sure that what they're offering to our students is relevant, is as current as possible, and much of what they've done, and I heard somebody refer to this in the high school group, they've Frankensteined a fairly positive, productive instructional experience for their students in the absence of having a defining anchor text because some of them are so old. Our 6th through 8 team was also very conscious of this, of their effort in this way. But they also decided, with the 3 intermediate schools, we do need to have something that is kind of a defining anchor text. But they wanted to be considerate of the social studies, social justice standards and equity non-negotiables. Again, professional development was important. Student friendliness and how they imagined students would interact with the material. The interface with with Schoology and how that would manage itself, and then online access, because as we all have experienced the impact of the pandemic and having to be at home, that online access was really important. Who knows if that's going to be a situation where we may need to go back online for a bit. And then they love the idea of having a resource library. And one of the things is we talked about checking down on what was important, but how that reading intervention and how that text to voice interface was going to work for our students was a big selling point. So we got together, and after we prioritized what we were trying to accomplish in the 6th through 8 group, we explored 4 options. Choices, which is a resource that comes from Brown University, TCI, Savas, and McGraw-Hill. And so we had opportunities to explore the online materials for all 4 of these groups, but we also got plenty of hard copy materials from McGraw-Hill, and it was amazing. Anyway, and we distributed those, and they looked at the hard copy materials from McGraw-Hill. They considered and reviewed the options, and then they're going to offer recommendations. So as we sat down and we talked with the group after that, we did 4 presentations, obviously virtually, and the things that we came away with for TCI, where they were aligned to the scope of courses in grades 6 through 8. Their content considers current events, and because much of their material is online, they are malleable, and they're not print texts that are just a little bit like when you drive a car off the lot, it starts depreciating right away. These online materials are still going to be something they're going to be growing as events happen. They really liked with TCI, the professional support. 2 of our teachers tried out particular units and were able to access online professional support in real time, which was an unintended positive outcome of their attempting to utilize the resources with their students. And then in TCI, one of the really cool text-to-voice aspects of TCI, the other ones that we looked into had kind of the synthetic voice that as you speak into it, it kind of processes it back. And it wasn't awful because I listened to it. TCI has an actual human voice actually reading reading the text aloud to the kids. And several of our team members really liked having a natural human voice. One of the considerations, and I didn't want to put it as a advantages and disadvantages, it's a consideration, and this is one of the things that our team really came around to several times. It's an online textbook. It still has very much a textbook style feel to it. But we really, in the grand scheme of things, because it covers 6 through 8 content, world, and then the 2 earliest U.S. history aspects of our history experience, and the reading, the access to the reading text to voice were a real positive. Now, with choices, a much different resource. McGraw-Hill was clearly a textbook. Savas, clearly a textbook. TCI has a textbook type feel. Choices, entirely different. Choices were thematic units, very connected to social justice standards and political issues, in a very non-judgmental, picking a sides way, which was impressive. A massive library of resources with exceptional professional support. Problem is, they don't have anything for world history in 6th grade. So if we were to purchase something for 6th, 7th, and 8th, they would not have any world history units for our 6th grade students. Also, the thematic units don't, it has gaps because they're thematic. They don't have a chronological buildup to them, which was, as we're trying to come up with a structure that's going to be, it's going to be transferable to different teachers at different times, and also that's going to give us something that we can build a curriculum 6 through 8 for all 3 of our schools. They felt like that was going to leave us with some gaps. So those are the 2 choices. I think in the end we decided TCI was going to be the best of the selections for our 6 through 8 group. But the choices, they would like to consider the possibility of certain selected units, because you can purchase from choices specific units, and there were some of them that were particularly relevant that they would really like to consider utilizing. Obviously, there's cost to that, so we would want to consider using that. But TCI, from a comprehensive 6 through 8 curricular resource, that was the one for us. So I think that's. So, Dieter, would you like me to ask questions? Have them ask me questions about this, because it's entirely different for high school.
Yep, and Steve, do you just want to talk about, some of the teachers couldn't make it tonight, but how many teachers did you have in the group?
Yep, we had.
And then how did you get feedback from the schools?
Okay, we had seven teachers who were with us throughout the whole experience, and they were, like I said, they were really super helpful. And they would go back to their teacher. That's most of the the social studies teachers from each of the intermediate schools, because they have smaller departments. But they would go and they would share the conversations, and they also shared the resources, not just with their social studies department members, but many of them have co-teachers, and some of the co-teachers in their relationships at school also got a chance to explore the material and try them on for size and imagine how they were going to build out units. So that's the feedback I got, and we went through. We had a matrix, and we went through, and they provided anonymous feedback, which wasn't really anonymous because they would put their names in there because they chose to. But the anonymous feedback on the different resources, and we checked that down, and then we had about an hour and a half conversation about what are the pros and cons of each of them, of the resources, and I thought it was a really thoughtful conversation about how this would be utilized in their learning environments.
And then, yeah, Steve, I think if we want to take any questions about 6-8 social studies, and then we'll pass it over to Heather and you to talk about just the particular courses at the high school that we needed to hit at, as we've adopted a few resources over
questions? Jay?
So when you consider project-based learning and this particular resource, what's your gut on that?
That's an interesting question because TCI was very, and I think everyone knows that that question is coming up. All the vendors know that that question is coming because it's the right question to ask. And our teachers ask the same question of each of the vendors.
Mm-hmm.
TCI's product lends itself because they also refer to it as a resource rather than as a curriculum, which I like.
Mm-hmm.
They realized that you could take pieces of it's a huge library of resources. No one could possibly cover it, but they knew that it was going to be useful as a resource for students in a project-based learning environment.
I can tell, like, right away, I would say, because you have content considers current events and all of those types of things, it's going to lend itself well to project-based learning. So I was just wondering if you guys talked about it, but to me, that's one of the selling points on this particular one.
And that's what our team
Yeah.
also said. And they were coming at it from several different perspectives, 6 through 8.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they saw that, especially as they were looking into the online resources, that these were going to be, there's aspects of those that they could pull and add into a project-based environment. Also cross-curricular humanities style,
Mm-hmm.
which is a conversation that's starting to really grow, so that, because there's literacy elements in the social studies experience.
Sure.
And then one of the things for the full board to know is that we've also added into our budget a significant amount of curriculum writing time, because part of what needs to happen is that the units around project-based learning, the units around our ICANN statements need to be aligned then to new resources. So we have teachers that have committed already to doing some curriculum writing in the summer, and that's where we really marry the two things that we're trying to do, is in the time they spend in the summer, updating those GDC documents so that they're really clear as to what part of this resource helps you hit at this particular standard or this particular equity non-negotiable.
I have a question.
Amy?
So when you're looking at TCI and then choices, just looking at choices, are we looking at comparable prices? Because with TCI, I just see so much more. So like, I'm just concerned about like with choices, if we went with that, how much more are we gonna be spending on a couple, kind of supplementing additional material, since it says thematic units don't address the entire scope. And then we also obviously have the issue of the no 6th grade world history. So I'm just curious as to how we would bring those elements in and what that cost would be to us, or will we use resources that we currently have?
And that's a really good point. These were the top 2. Our team really came down to the one that we would likely want to purchase or recommend that we purchase would be the TCI. We had a couple people who would understand that there's a financial limitation to how much we can purchase, but they would like to, if it's still possible, access at least some of the choices units at a much. Purchasing all of choices is cost prohibitive, but purchasing specific units of choices as they are relevant to what might be happening in TCI might be something that we wanted to consider. The price, can I go to the price tag?
Yeah, go ahead.
The price tag for TCI, my best estimate, the price tag for TCI for all 3 intermediate levels at all 3 of the intermediate schools would be approximately $168,000. And that's for all the teacher supplementary materials, the online texts, for a 6-year period.
Does that include all updates as well?
So, yeah. Yep.
And can you ballpark the cost of the individual choices units that you were talking about that teachers are interested in?
Yeah, per teacher, to my recollection, is about $5,000 or so per unit.
And how do those units work? So are you given all the materials, or $5,000 buys you what? For how long?
Yeah, it buys you the units, and then it's the student access for the access to those units. So it's a strange structure as far as, so guesstimating number of students going into, along with the teacher materials and so on.
And would that be uniformly distributed? So would there be a collective decision among the intermediate schools that these are the units that we want to do? And then that cost would be X amount?
Yeah, and that's why, just expanding it out. So let's say we were to purchase a unit on War of 1812. I don't know why you would make a unit on that, but okay, War of 1812. That would be something that the entire 7th grade. What's complicating is in that this whole sequence thing, some of the schools have multi-age classrooms
Mhm.
level, which it's certainly good, but it complicates how we would utilize a resource like choice, and maybe even the world history.
Okay. So in regards to the choices part of it, which I think is a little bit more complex, is that gonna come forward as a separate thing each time you guys be like, well, I mean, depending on the cost involved, but we've decided as an intermediate group that we want to get this unit from choices, and that's outside of TCI, but that's gonna work well with these things. Is that how it's gonna come forward?
Yes, and the choices units are eligible for Title IV funding because they're also tied to social studies content. So those would be likely renewable over the several years by continuing to use Title IV funding. So they would be considered a supplementary resource to the core resource. So the board approves any resource that is in the hands of all students at that grade level. And then we just wanted to make sure that you guys are aware, like we said with the ELA research, you're never gonna find one thing that hits at all the things that you're looking for. And especially appealing about the choices units were some of the ones that are tied to the social justice standards. So the more we get into that work, we want to have unbiased resources that allow, that push that work into our classrooms. And so therefore, that's where those units likely will come more tied in. ELA, sorry, I should have prefaced this, comes forward to the board for adoption next week, Monday. Social studies and science and the progress monitoring tool comes forward to the board for potential approval next week, Monday. Social studies and science don't come until the end of June. They haven't had quite as much time to refine cost and all of those things just yet. So they come forward a few weeks after. We just didn't want to have two separate workshops over the next couple of weeks, especially when our teachers are on their summer break. For science, we're a little bit closer to a final decision, but a lot of what the teachers are looking for are those really flexible resources. It is very challenging to find one resource that can be used that flexibly, which is why lots of times it's going to be a matter of us piecing things together.
Okay, thank you. Other questions?
So last week, we spoke with a lot of the kids from the Black Student Union at our committee. Would they be happy with this curriculum? Because I did glance through the sample, and I was happy to see a lot of, Native Americans were brought up often, but, and Black and African Americans, but also those kids keep bringing up the fact they don't want to be always seen in the past. So will it bring up much of their modernity of it all?
I would say they would be happier than they are with their current offering. I don't think it certainly would not replace the course that we're looking to add. That's a totally different direction that we're trying to go in. But I think they'd be happier as they were hearkening back to their 6th through 8th grade experience. This would be a much more representative, better representation of their lived experience.
Okay.
What they grew up with. I'm guessing. It's a good question. I might have to ask them. Hey, let's
Have those kids look through it, because those kids' voices are amazing.
Mhm.
Good idea. And we do, going into the high school, the next part of the presentation, much briefer, is what we did with high school and Heather, thank you for hanging in there. The difficulty with the high school situation, obviously in the intermediate level, 6th through 8th grade, there's a sequence. Everyone's got the same, some similarity there. In high school, an econ textbook and a world history textbook and an American history textbook and an AP Euro textbook, they're all discrete areas of study in and of themselves. So it's difficult for us to say, okay, we're just going to buy McGraw-Hill stuff. It just doesn't, that just doesn't make sense. So it has been a slower go for us, and getting it off the ground has not been, it's just been more, I wouldn't say difficult, it's just been harder for us to get the momentum going. So Heather has been part of that discussion with us. Our teachers, as I said, and the comment came about Frankenstein, the Frankenstein nature of their courses. Many of our teachers really feel very positive about what they had, however, or what they've created. However, they would like to have an anchor text, something, because if I'm at Hale and Deidre's teaching the same course at Central, having some common aspects of assessment, similar materials, so we can collaborate would be helpful. It also helps in those co-teaching experiences. So, so we have 4 texts that are at least 15 years old, and our economics text, as I said, is super ancient. And I spoke with one of our economics teachers today, and she's not on this call today, but I certainly appreciate it. She clarified that they really, it's not a student-friendly text, the one that they have, and even the most recent edition seems outdated, and they'd like to explore different resource options. In world history, just a classroom set of the most recent edition would be sufficient as an anchor. In global relations, which is often Central only, the international relations text, this most recent one would be sufficient. And then, similar to economics, government and politics, the teachers would like to consider the McGraw-Hill text rather than a Magruder's text, if it's still possible. And we do have some time to consider looking at those. The others of our resources that we have are, they're fairly recent. So we've replaced those already. So this is not nearly going to be nearly as expensive as the ELA adoption.
And Heather, I don't know if you want to jump in and just kind of share some of your experience with some of the adoptions and working with some of the teachers at the high schools.
For instance, I also teach sociology, and the sociology version of McGraw-Hill is very good. The entire platform, what's included, because we have a physical text, but it also comes with an online version, which was very helpful, certainly now. And we like the features and things that it has. However, my understanding from the psychology teachers is that they also use McGraw-Hill, but the McGraw-Hill that psychology has isn't quite as robust as what's available for sociology. So we want to make sure, while I love the platform for Soc, we want to make sure that the McGraw-Hill platform for U.S. government is more like the sociology one as opposed to the psychology one. I have their physical text, which I do like. So I got, the traditional box of stuff, and I looked through that and I really liked what was there, but I'd like to see how their U.S. government online platform compares. That being said, I don't dislike Magruder's. None of us dislike Magruder's. We are fine with, if it comes down to getting Magruder's or getting nothing, we're totally fine with Magruder's. Magruder's is fine, and we're happy to roll with that. But it's just a matter of what we can do in the given amount of time. One thing that we were very unanimous though on, even if we just do classroom sets of texts, which most of us are fine with that, We do believe it's important that every student have their own copy of the book, even if it's an online text. Otherwise, how can we assign the readings, homeworks, things like that for when we do use the book if the student can't take it home. And if we're taking books out of the classroom to take home, we all know how that story ends. So we were very unanimous that if we have classroom sets, which we are fine with, that we definitely want students to have online access to the text as well.
So the social studies team still has, the high school team still has a little bit of work to do, but we're just going to give you an update. It's teams of teachers at each high school that are reviewing materials. They'll review them with students over the course of the next couple of weeks between now and the end of the school year, so that we can be ready to come back to the board with a full recommendation towards the middle to the tail end of June.
Any questions about the high school part of things? It's a work in progress.
Yeah.
I just had one.
Okay, sure.
Why is global relations only at Central?
I don't know. Heather, do you know why global relations is only at Central?
Matter of numbers. I don't know if they had enough students sign up for it at Hale.
It's offered at both because it's in the course schedule, but this last year we only offered it at the one. So right now that's who's reviewing the text, but it'd be offered at.
I see.
I
Okay.
guess my note was inaccurate. We only have a teacher at Central this year, so that's.
The person giving feedback on the adoption.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
I just thought it was only offered at Central.
Yeah,
It seemed
No,
No, it's not.
odd.
no.
Okay. Any other questions? All right, thank you so much for your work on this.
All right, so we are gonna actually skip science for a second and do our progress monitoring tool, and then we're gonna come back. And so I am going to pass that over to Chris Miller, who is our coordinator of innovation, who's gonna start talking a bit about our progress monitoring tool, and then he'll bring in the rest of our team that worked on that one and has some things to share tonight.
Sure, I'll just start us off quick, and then Ann Locke and Diane Lazaridis are here too, and they help me run this committee. But basically, to oversimplify our task, we were trying to compile all of the different progress monitoring tools that every school around our district uses in their MPSS processes, and then figure out a way that we could streamline that for our students and for our teachers. So can I see the presentation, Deidre?
Yeah.
Okay, so on that first slide, I just wanted to make a note that we had representation from every elementary school, and we tried to really target the people who are involved in those MTSS processes. And then the questions that we were really looking to consider were, how can we streamline our data collection? How can we align our progress monitoring tools between schools and departments? And then how can we align our universal screener with our progress monitoring system in a more direct way? And so, to make a long story short, the committee was overwhelmingly positive that FastBridge was a tool that could combine our universal screener and our progress monitoring tools and give us really streamlined data that can help us just make all those systems better. So I don't know if anyone wants to jump in. I'm trying to keep it really tight and short, but Anne or Laz, if you have anything to add to that, and then we can open it up to anyone else that was on the committee.
Well, yeah, I mean, Chris really did say it in a nutshell. It's interesting right now that, we have our universal screener, which is the MAP assessment that we use. And then when we get into looking at small group instruction or getting into the MTSS system of tier 2, tier 3 interventions, and then even with our special ed population, everything is so piecemeal right now. It's very difficult to show any cohesion between what's happening in universal instruction or tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, or special ed. We really are kind of grabbing at straws to make the instruction match with some of the information that we're finding from these assessments. So when we really looked at FastBridge, it was all inclusive. We were able to look at saying, okay, here's our universal screener. Here are some suggestions that they give us as to, hey, your classroom, you know, the children in Universal really need to focus on these certain things. And it would actually even give you some lessons that you might be able to use, and, you know, then use our core resources to you know, help do that instruction. And then it also breaks it down into tier 2, tier 3, and special ed components where again, it gives us more information as to what we can do within those small group instructional pieces to be able to support that tier 1 instruction. It is the alignment that is the missing component in our minds at this point, and this would kind of solve that problem. And yeah, you know, Chris mentioned we had 21 people on our team that really looked into this resource, from, you know, classroom teachers, special education, our, you know, student support staff, our principals, and they really thought that this was a great way of bringing that cohesion to using assessment to really then drive lessons and instruction to meet everyone's needs, all the way from our universal instruction through that small group piece. Anne?
Caitlin, I don't know if you had, or if Becky wanted to add anything to that, and then we'll have Anna and Chris come up and talk about right now so that the board is aware. We have MAPS, and then we're doing MAPS checklists in the early grades because those are aligned to our AGR contract, which we can switch to be aligned to this tool as well, as we're in the renewal of that contract this year. Then we're using different progress monitoring tools for our students that are English language learners. We're using different progress monitoring tools when it comes to our students who are taking our reading intervention. And then if they qualify as a student with a disability, we're using different progress monitoring tools to measure progress towards our IEP goals. So if you think about that, it started to become more obvious when we went into virtual instruction last year that we are using entirely too many tools to try to solve one problem, which is getting accurate measurements of how our learners are doing so that we can keep this moving forward. And so that is really what the team was trying to do for our MAP scores, which have served us well as a universal screener for many years, and we've used them. We are not getting enough data to use on like a daily basis in through some of the tools in order to make that informative enough to really shift instruction soon enough to make sure that we're not missing the mark for some of our learners. So I'll let Caitlin jump in, and then I'll pass it over to Anne and Chris.
Yep, so I agree with what everyone has said so far about FastBridge. I think something that really stood out was the it being aligned with the screener and progress monitoring, because right now when we have MTSS conversations, it's difficult when not everyone understands all the tools being used. So the fact that they would be more aligned would allow us to have conversations surrounding students' growth that everyone was kind of on the same page about and could make instructional decisions around more easily.
And I'll just jump in real quick following you, Caitlin. Everything with this program just looks really beneficial. The data reports that we were able to look at are really easy to read and would just really help in the planning when we are running an MTS meeting or talking about student progress. And also their online PD and videos would really help with the implementation as we're starting to roll this out with staff. And that was something that we did talk about in our meetings, just with where we are with MAPS and just how we would still need to do some form of PD with staff just to bring that back around for everybody.
And from a special ed perspective, what was really nice to me about this program was it wasn't simply an online tool that the kids would use on their iPads. There were paper and pencil options available as well. And to administer them, the time required was a lot less. And just to be able to, like I said, give the kids an opportunity to do something at their own pace rather than it being timed, I think would be really helpful.
And Chris, can you just tell the board which school you're from?
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm Chris Dakin. I'm a special education teacher at Hoover Elementary.
And I'll scoot in here. Just kind of to echo what Chris said and what Diane said, this really unifies everything. So as we're measuring the impact of our specially designed instruction, it's very important that everything is aligned and that there's a common language so that we can actually see the progress.
Would this be for all grade levels or just special ed, or I feel like I'm a little lost on what we're going for here, because I'm familiar with MAP and various other resources. Would this be another resource on top of that, or? I'm a little confused on what this is specifically for our teachers.
Yep, and I can jump in on that. It actually would replace MAPS for us, and replace AIMSWeb, which we're using. It would replace Imagine Learning, which we are using, and it would replace some of the teacher-generated progress monitoring tools for some of our interventions that we have at the elementary school. So it replaces a lot of things with one streamlined resource that we can use for K through 12th grade.
Okay.
Other questions? Jane?
So we're available in FastBridge from whole group reports down to specific individual pieces with, the graphing tools were amazing, much more detailed than we've had in the recent past.
So, all right, just kind of, walk me through, give me a visual, Diane. Think about, compared to MAP, are we talking about fall, winter, spring assessment, and then progress monitoring in between as needed, depending on the child? Is that the kind of, so same as far as, time spent on assessment for kids?
Time consuming than MAP. We are still looking at fall, winter, spring, yet the assessments are truly about 15 to 20 minutes each, and we wouldn't be doing like the whole MAP skills checklist with the younger students. So it would be definitely a time saver for the classroom teachers and the individual students for that universal screener. But yes, it would still be fall, winter, spring, and then progress monitoring as needed depending on the individual child.
Okay. Are the reports instant results? Instant? Right away? Know how we did?
Chris can jump in.
Yes?
There's a little bit of a delay between the Zoom and you guys, so I think, we're cutting out the first couple of seconds of what you guys say.
Do you want me to repeat?
We can't hear you, Chris. There you go.
Oh, now you can hear me? Okay. They told us in almost every case we should get instant results. Every once in a while there might be a 24-hour delay.
And that is the big difference in what we've needed and what we realized again last year when we went into emergency remote teaching, is that when we didn't have, we weren't administering MAPS tests, we weren't administering the lack of progress that we were able to immediately measure for students, regardless of kind of where they were, got really evident. And the amount of kind of when we started going back to say, well, as we were having meetings with each school to say, tell us about the data you're collecting right now, it was all over the board. And a MAPS test, for those of you who aren't familiar, gives you something called a RIT range that said the student skills are within this range. And then you really have to do some digging on the part of the teacher to go in and say, okay, that means Deidre needs work in these vocabulary terms. That means Jane needs work in these writing skills. That means Kristen needs work with these reading skills. You have to do quite a bit of digging. This removes all of that because the progress monitoring tools will immediately come back and say, okay, in your class, Deidre, in your regular tier 1 instruction, you have these 5 students who need to be working on this. You have these 4 students who need to be working on this specific skill. These students are set and ready to go. And then when they do the next set of progress monitoring, it again helps you just align those specific skills. So it is a far better tool for a couple of reasons. One, it's going to give us a clean and fresh look at where our students are and how they're doing, which we haven't had in some time. And then it's going to give us that real-time, more live data versus having to wait sometimes until a cycle finishes so that I can find out my whole class is missing these larger chunks of skills. So it is far more at the ready as far as our ability to check on how kids are doing and then provide the needed instruction to make sure they're not only at target, but moving ahead of where we expect them to be.
Do we have a set like intervention time in each in schools? Like my school, we have half an hour every day that's intervention for all our tiers. Like, is that something that we have?
Some of our schools write their schedule that way. Most of them do not.
Okay. And this just, I can never remember anything. I already missed it. This would replace MAP, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm sure I got that right.
Is the test adaptive like MAP?
Yes.
It is.
Yeah, it'll go up in
Yep.
level as students are doing better on it.
Mhm.
It'll bring the questions back down a level if students are getting several in a row wrong. Similar.
Okay.
Just a fresh set of look at, a fresh look at how our kids are doing with just far more quick response tools than what we have right now.
I'm going to channel my inner Noah. What's the cost difference?
Don't steal my question.
Good that we're still laughing as we're almost 2 hours in. We got one more subject to go.
Dollars per student. And I can't speak to what MAP was. Deidre?
Can you repeat that, Diane? You cut out for a second there.
Fastbridge is $8 per student. So if you could, discuss what MAP is. I'm not quite sure what MAP costs, but I think this is very cost effective.
Yeah, this is about 60% of the cost of MAPs.
Okay.
Other questions? So, are we confident that this takes 15 to 20 minutes compared to what maps take?
Sometimes up to as much as an hour and a half to 2 hours per student, because it's self-paced.
Right, okay. And we're confident, so is this because it's less self-paced? That the
No.
time is less?
Yeah, not less self-paced, just fewer questions because you administer it more frequently and you get the opportunity to do it more frequently. You're not needing to ask quite so many questions in order to get an assessment on where students are.
And so, we're confident that that lesser amount of questions will still give us the breadth of evaluation
Yes.
that is true for our students, so that we know that we're working from a correct data set and not just a skewed data set, you know what I mean?
Yes, I do know what you mean. And yes, the program's been around for quite some time, and so they have all kinds of good research examples on where it does really help you to progress monitor a little bit more carefully and quickly. And again, then intervene sooner, right? Versus waiting until a whole next section to realize a student missed units on measurement. We would know that in far more real-time data. So that allows us to do too many lessons on measurement instead of the next quarter a student being in a full intervention for 30 minutes a day on measurement or something like that. Just allows us that opportunity to collect that data a lot quicker and with some efficacy.
Okay. And is the cost, is this per test or per year?
Per year.
All right.
Sorry, I keep leaning over because Noah's behind the pole.
Yeah, I know. I do too.
Then they can't see me on the Zoom.
You know, window in the pool. All right, that's all the questions I had on this. Is this being looked, well, I lied because then I came up with another question. Is this being looked at being implemented for next year? Is that the goal?
Yeah.
Okay. And would there be some sort of, if this was adopted, communication, because it's different and families have been used to maps forever?
Yep.
How that would be communicated to them that it's going to be different than what it was before, and how it's different but better.
Yes, of course. It would be a significant amount of communication, especially at the start of the school year, just letting families know that there was a change. It'll be communication to families who are participating in the MTSS process to let them know this is the tool that we're using. Our families of students with special needs will know this is how we're measuring progress towards the goals of the IEP, the academic goals of the IEP. And then right before the test and then right as the results come in, we'll have more communication to families to explain, yep, this is the different universal screener, and then here's how you read the results and what they tell you about how your child is learning in school.
And how would we crosswalk? Because don't we compare, year over year from maps? So would we have, is there some sort of key to say that a score in maps at this level is equivalent to a score in Fastbridge on that level, so you can compare?
The closest that you can do in comparison between the two is that maths has an approximate grade level equivalent, and so does FastBridge. The data from maps from the last couple of years is not quite as consistent given some of the anomalies of emergency remote teaching. So we would basically be kind of starting over with a little bit of baseline data, no matter whether we were continuing to use maps in the fall or whether we started with a new tool.
So is there a plan for that? You're developing that baseline for our students?
Yes.
Okay. Any other questions that I may have struck by asking my questions? Brendan?
I think I have one. You said it's 60% less?
Yeah.
Doing this? So.
60% the cost.
Of the cost,
40% less.
Yeah.
So 40% less. Okay.
Yeah.
So almost half off.
Yep.
What's the downside of this? Because it sounds like this is the way you're selling it. It sounds like it's very great and does all that we want, but if it's 40% less, what's not there? Why?
Yeah, nothing that we can find. And at the present moment, there's been really no disadvantage to us, as it allows us just to streamline so many different things. MAPS is a larger company. They've been around for a lot longer. I don't know that this cost of FastBridge will be the cost of FastBridge forever. That would be something that we'll have to investigate over time, whether or not that stays consistent or it doesn't. But that's what we're finding right now, is that, again, similar to, for those of you who worked for us at one time, like Jane and Jeff, we used to have MAPS test, and then it went into something called a backpack. So it gave you activities to do with that student depending on their MAPS score. Brennan, you're nodding. You might have used that in your teaching career. This does some of that, and we have not used that tool in MAPS in a long time because that was an additional expense. It is just a more well-known progress monitoring tool and universal screener, so therefore it comes with that associated cost.
Are there any other schools in the area that are using this as well?
You guys, yes. Not yet. There you go,
How
Chris.
about
Now I
now?
can hear you.
Okay, so St. Francis, Brown Deer, and Elmbrook have all transitioned to FastBridge recently. So, and Adam got in contact with them during his DAC networks, and they had nothing but good things to say about their swap. So.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? No? Okay.
All
Thank
right.
you very
and
much.
Last but not least, Team Science, and thank you, Jess and Carl, for sticking it out for the long haul. I think Chris may or may not be, Gaza might be logging back in. I messaged him and said we'll be a little bit more delayed than we even thought. So talking about 612 science, and give a little background on that one. So we'll go back in our slides. So for 6-8 middle school science, kind of where are we now? Right now, our core resource is FOSS kits that we purchased, many years ago. I don't even know exactly how many years ago.
Yikes.
And they come with these consumables in them every year. We continued the consumables for the first few years and then didn't, and then tried to piece them together ourselves. You can't even get new materials for FOSS kits because the ones that we have are so old that at the end of the school year, they will no longer provide replacement materials for them. And our teachers over the years, because again, I think we've owned them for about 17 or 18 years, have really dismantled them and just used them kind of as they saw fit. So that is currently kind of where we sit for 6-8 science. And so our committee work, we really looked at, again, the resources that were aligned to our deeper learning competencies and our equity non-negotiables. The identified needs by our science team were that need for flexibility within the resource to adapt based on teacher strengths and student interest, that it's adaptable for project-based learning, that we budget to replace consumables so that we don't end up in the same boat, that we have equitable access to science equipment across all 3 of our intermediates, which is not happening. It has not happened at this point. We have sort of a hodgepodge of science materials available at the 3 intermediate schools. and which resource actually best aligns to us getting at equity through deeper learning. So they went through the same process that you've heard over and over again. We contacted several publishers, we reviewed materials. If anyone would like a set of textbooks for some door stoppers, we have samples upon samples back in our office that we do not need. And where they landed was really the materials and the platforms in Defined Learning, which is an online project-based learning management tool where you actually can enter the projects and it crosswalks them with standards as well as access to career clusters. So how many times has that student done a project that accessed nursing? How many times has that student done a project that accessed agriculture or the different career clusters? Gizmos, which is something we purchased this year for our high school teachers. It's an online lab simulation that was fantastic and a much needed tool in virtual instruction that they absolutely love and would like, now 6-8 would like to keep going with that one. Open Ed Science resources, those are free materials. And so they are a collective of resources that are available to school districts across the country that allow schools to kind of put together materials and resources to teach particular units. And then the team also looked at Savas, McGraw-Hill, and Amplify Science textbooks online. Many of them left them unfulfilled, meaning it's very challenging, again, to find one core resource that hits at all the things we're trying to do. So the team really felt strongly that it was important to them, similar to some of the social studies teams, to really design our own, with some access to some of the resources that we know are out there, and related to our ICANN statements as well as our equity non-negotiables and our deeper learning work. So their current recommendations are the use of the Open Sci-Fi Ed, a few units that are adding to that in the fall, purchasing Gizmos, possibly purchasing of Defined Learning. So that's going to be that place where we capture all of the learning and samples of mastery. Significant amount of curriculum writing time. We need unit plans, designing common project assessments. We also are discovering that we used to use something called Build Your Own Curriculum, which was the place where we stored all of these units and all of these pieces of instruction. We transitioned that about 7 or 8 years ago onto Google, but it is not super well organized at the present moment, so that will be some work we do this summer. And then getting standardized lab equipment at all 3 intermediates, and then creating a consumables budget with yearly purchases for things like food coloring, live earthworms, etc. So this adoption is going to look a little different for us than kind of a typical adoption. And I will pass it over to Jessica, who is actually our science lead, curricular lead, as well as participated with the team to talk a little bit more about 6-8 science.
Yeah, so I teach science and math over at FLW in addition to being the science lead. So I've been a part of every science curriculum discussion for the past 20 years in West Dallas. So most of that time has been FOSS, and it is really outdated. As we went through, we were excited to see what was new out there in the science curriculum world, because we hadn't looked in so long, and we were disappointed. West Dallas, we found, is ahead of the curve compared to where the standard programs and online resources really are. As far as like the standard companies like McGraw-Hill and things, it would be taking a step backwards for us, which is why we think we need to put our time and effort into using our personnel resources that we have. We have great teachers who have been doing amazing things, and it's time to really put that together and not tie ourselves to any resource that would limit our opportunities for deeper learning, and to really allow student interest to continue to be a large part of our science program. Gizmos, I wanted to add to the Gizmos piece. That was a part that we really took away from this online and virtual learning experience, how powerful simulations were for our students, because that was really the only tool that we had. The feedback we got from students was, I love science, we get to do something in here all the time. And for us, we were thinking, you're online, we haven't given you any materials, we haven't done anything. but their interactions with the online simulations really showed us the power of that tool, and that's why we really think the Gizmos piece would be a nice supplement to the hands-on and the other types of learning we do in the science classrooms.
Any questions about 6-8 science? And when 6-8 science again comes forward to the board, it comes a little later. It'll come with a really clearly mapped out how much our yearly consumables need to be budgeted for, how much each year do we need to budget for curricular alignment and curriculum writing in the summertime with our staff and our teachers. One of the big things is sometimes we ask our teachers to do curriculum writing, and when they are off in the summer, it is harder to gather a group of teachers. And so the science team from 6-8 is really committed to doing that this summer to make sure that we actually have those units and that they're tied to essential questions that are tied to the NGSS standards for science in 6-8. And then that we're also refreshing right now. I think we discovered that Frank Lloyd Wright has full sets of goggles for kids that are significantly older. We don't have goggles for all the students at Lane at the present moment. And at West, we have more than we needed. So we are finding some anomalies like that, just not even by having a clear inventory of what is expected to have for materials in a school for 6th grade science, for 7th grade science, for 8th grade science. As much of it was just aligned to whatever was in these FOSS kits, which are grossly underserving our science needs in our schools.
Questions?
Well, I just want to say that I'm wondering if we should just all take a moment and think about Jen's stats up right now, because I definitely think that as you do that work, she's with us. So I hope that you'll channel her and all of her expertise. Hearing you talk about this just makes me think of her. So I'm just wondering, how big are the science practices going to be as you create this curriculum or as you continue this work? What emphasis will it be?
Pretty central piece for us. We want to make sure that we preserve and really put the unique science skills at the forefront. Although science does have many cross-curricular skills that we build on and align with and support, especially when we're working with other content areas. However, we want to make sure that the skills that are unique to science really do retain that focus. And we do have those ICANNs that are skill-based for students, realizing that, again, to really expose our students to the different possibilities of what science can be, there are specific skills they won't get elsewhere.
And just to comment on what Jane shared, Jen was a lot of the conversation as the team has been working over the last couple of months, because this is work. For those of you who are unaware, we had a science curricular lead and a longstanding member of our science team who has presented to our board a number of times who passed away last year. And so she lives and breathes in all of this work that we're doing and inspired quite a bit of it. So yes, she came up quite a bit in the course of the conversations in the last couple of weeks. Any other questions about 6-8 science?
Yeah.
Brendan?
If we have the teachers designing this, and while I'm sure that they are exceptional science teachers, a lot of science instruction has not included the contributions of a wide variety of individuals. How are you guys going to address making sure that you're keeping that cultural relevance in play when we don't generally have that as a piece that's taught up to this point for most of us as educators in the science field?
About the Open SciEd, that is that free resource. It's all available in Google Drive. You just need a school Gmail account to access it as an educator. And that scores very highly on the open, I can't remember the name of it, but what we use to evaluate, because it is very current and they're always continually adding to it, And equity is not only a huge piece in West Dallas, but that is a national focus. So that does give us a resource in addition to things like News ELA and other reading support that we use in science. We will have the open SciEd that we also can access to help us actually find and bring in resources, because you're right, a lot of the classic or traditional science textbooks didn't mention a lot of scientists or didn't go into other contributions, but with open SciEd being ongoing as far as contributions and things, we're finding that to be a very current access point for us.
Thank you.
Newsella is such a great resource. I use it daily.
Yep.
Other questions? I just want to say that I love science, and I really would encourage you to look at the different types of labs when you're writing this curriculum, that you can work into it, because labs is what makes science real to students when they're learning it. And as you saw with the gizmos and even virtually doing these sorts of things and then being able to interact that way, maybe got across more to students that if they would have been in the classroom trying to work with them. So I think when you're writing the curriculum, the more interesting different types of labs that you can think about and incorporating will definitely help get make science more real for more students. And it makes me very sad that we were not including those sorts of things in our budgets, so that it wasn't teachers going and getting it, but it was our district providing it. So I definitely think that I personally would be in favor of including those things in the budgets moving forward, so that not only is it not coming out of our teachers' pockets, but it is going to be equitable across all of our classrooms, because those materials are provided uniformly.
Yep, we agree. And one of the things that I kind of went pretty quickly through those slides is I do know what time it is, and we have a whole nother workshop after this one. But one of the things that teachers really felt strongly about is that they need to support the work by students doing science and commitment to the laboratory sciences versus just simply looking at a text and referencing back a resource like that. Less theory and more doing. Okay. All right, so our last one of the night, I promise, is 912 High School Science, and that team is in a bit of the same boat as 6-8 Science. And so science was missed in several adoption cycles. Apparently we had it tied to some referenda work in some previous years. Several of our books are copyrighted from the mid to late 90s. Our teachers, again, have done an amazing job of piecing together a lot of materials in order to keep things current and for our students and what they need. This team used the exact same process as you've heard over and over again, an analysis of what's the research tell us in the field, an analysis of our adaptability to project-based learning and our alignment to our strategic plan and our equity non-negotiables. And this is where the high school team was landing. They are also looking at Defined Learning, which is an online, again, project-based management learning tool. Same one, crosswalk standards with exposure to career clusters, which is really important to expand our students' knowledge of. Continuing with the purchase of gizmos, the CK12 open source textbook that is currently we're using for biology, and then some McGraw-Hill texts. And again, as they looked at kind of a combination of a bunch of those resources, back at the same boat, not really one that's saying this is exactly what will meet the needs of our learners and really align to the work we're trying to do. So the current recommendations of this team are to use the CK12 for biology, that's a continuation, and other open source texts, to continue the purchase of gizmos, to look at Defined Learning, significant curriculum writing time, upgrade the lab equipment that we currently have that actually is sustainable for us, as it's all movable. It's not things that we would fix to schools as the FACT team is doing their work. Create that consumable budget, and then purchasing vernier probes and interfaces for physics and chemistry, which include motion sensors, pH sensors, temperature probes, etc. So with that, I will pass it over to the last of our longstanding teacher colleagues with us tonight, Carl, who teaches at Central in our Flex community at Central. And Carl, just want to kind of update the board on a little bit on where the science team is landing and some of the things you're excited about with the opportunity to access more materials for kids to use in classes.
Oh, definitely. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay. So look, using the CK12 as I used it a couple years ago, it was pretty good. I used it in physical science, a little bit in chemistry and biology. So it covers a whole slew of them. It's not just one basic thing. The one defined learning that we just looked at, I really, really, really liked it. It had the projects pretty well laid out, but open enough that you can modify as you need. And that's really what I found is important, because our kids are not cookie cutters. They don't all fit in the same square hole. There are triangles, there's circles, there's squares, there's oblongs, there's even spirals. I mean, they're all different. And that program allowed for you to modify what you need and like take and pick and choose. And, you know, yes, it has some rigidity, like it's got some deadline type things, but a lot of that stuff is still flexible enough. So I really, really like that one. Oh, shoot, I'm drawing a blank on the other one.
Just right now, Carl, that you guys are dedicated to doing the curriculum writing this summer as
curriculum.
teams.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
And then upgrading
Sorry.
consumables and lab equipment. So normally when
Yeah.
we do an adoption, we cast forward 6 to 7 years, but nobody wants us to buy enough live earthworms to last us for that long. So there are parts of the science curriculum that needs to just be added each year versus storing some of those things in advance.
Yeah. So some of the things are like lab equipment. We talked about those veneer probes. There's a bunch of things for physics and chemistry that would be wonderful to have across both schools, or like ones that we could share, you know, flip flop back and forth, whatever. They would make things a lot easier, and having the newer ones allow for you to use it even on a Chromebook, not just having to have a dedicated computer like some of the older ones. They are a little bit more pricey, but they have a long-standing shelf life, I should say, as far as like updating, like getting more lab equipment for chemistry and such like that. We have so much that we have to go through and like replace. Goggles, like I know one of the rooms I was in, the goggles were like, the elastic was all stretched out. It was bad. But so sorry, I did not have my papers here. I left them at school.
That's okay, Carl. The dedication to the curriculum writing, so that we can start. Lots of our science teachers are already doing a lot of the units that we want to continue. We just don't have them centrally located in one spot so that it's organized and ready to go, so that if a parent said, right now, of course, we can share all of that with a parent, but so at the start of a semester, it was really clear to students and parents exactly what resources they were going to see, and that they're all in one centrally located place, so that the team is dedicated to doing that curriculum writing this summer to clean all of that up and get it all together.
Yeah. So I know, like right when I got hired, we were just ending on that other program, that resource for holding all of that stuff, and then we switched it over and started to do it on Google. And I do know that we are planning on doing a lot of that curriculum writing. We've talked about getting together and working through. I know we had some stuff already written out for biology that we're going to modify, and it's relatively close to being set. Just needed to update if we use new things like any of the online sources. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to seeing what we can do, because this is such potential.
And then a part of that is that teachers have been kind of doing a little bit of their own thing without a consistent core resource between our two comprehensive high schools. So we also have some differences in the experience between the two comprehensive high schools, which is not part of a guaranteed and viable curriculum. So that is the goal of dedicating some additional resources to science, is to make sure that we're getting that cleaned up so that the experience is equitable between the two high schools as well. It's not, neither one is bad or good. They just are focused on really different things. Sometimes that's in response to our learners, which is a good thing. Sometimes it is just the comfort level of what the teacher or what they immediately had access to do. And so we just want to make sure that we're making sure that the opportunity is the same regardless of which school you attend. any questions about where we are for 9-12 science? Yeah, Kristen?
Is it in the budget to compensate teachers doing all this work?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep, we increased the allocation in our leadership and learning budget for curriculum writing for this summer, knowing that we have this much of it to do. So our budget turns over in July, so we'll have some of the curriculum writing in June that's still paid for out of our previous year's budget. And then we increase the allocation in our next year's budget to account for the number of hours that teachers will be putting in.
Great.
And then the grand total that we are shooting for 6-12 science is somewhere between $175,000 and $200,000 for all the upgraded equipment we need, plus all the things that the teachers are looking for. And then a yearly allocation within our budgets for replacing those consumables. So that'll be an ongoing expense that we build into our budget each year.
Other questions? Brendan?
With both the 6-8 and the 9-12 working on their own curriculums, are we vertically aligning these so that we're not getting duplication of instructional components and topics that we're, I mean, you're going to have some, but so you don't have super redundancies, because I've dealt with that in the past.
Yep, and that is part of kind of what we've been working on for the last couple of years in math, and then working into ELA as we adopt new resources. We do a lot of that curricular alignment. We've been doing curricular alignment in 6-12 social studies and science for a while, and so we aren't that far off. But as soon as you update the resources, you need to make sure that the scope and sequence actually matches so that you don't do that same thing.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Other questions? I had one question. The thing about science is it changes almost all the time. And we can spend a lot of time writing curriculums and maybe having labs, but is there any flexibility that we would have in the budget for offering opportunities to update labs or things like that with new information that has come about?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so, yes, I mean, that's what comes into there being a yearly allocation for consumables or new labs that are available or things like that. And so hopefully that is sustainable for us forever, which it should be, given the dollar amounts that are associated with it. It's the other nice part about using the open ed resources is that they are updated all of the time, right? So new units, new suggestions, new labs, new different things come into those all the time. And then the reason that we need to upgrade all the equipment is so that you can hit at 90% of what those labs entail.
Mm-hmm.
And then your consumables hit at the other things that you need for the additional labs.
Okay. That's all the questions I had. Any other questions? All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you guys very much.
I'm excited to see what you guys come up with.
All right, so we will pass it over now. Thank you guys for that long haul, slightly longer than we expected, but that's okay. There's a lot of really good work going on within our teams this year. And so with that, we'll pass it over to Caitlin so she can explain how we're going to pay for all of this.
You guys, real quick, you guys want to take like a 5-minute break? Want to walk around? Okay. So let's just take a 5-minute break. Let's come back here at 8:19. Okay? All right. We're all here. Yep. Go ahead, Caitlin. Thank you.
Alrighty. All right. Okay. So I know budgets aren't super exciting, but this is a good one. It's a good follow-up from what we just went through because there is money to spend on a curriculum. So, okay. So we spent a lot of time talking about next year's budget. This one is going to focus on this year's budget. Okay. So budget amendments. Budget amendments are a normal part of many budget cycles, and they often
know what we have approximately left to spend, and if we have adjustments to make, this is a reasonable time to do them. So many school districts do budget amendments close to the end of their fiscal year. Budgets, at the time when we make them, are our best projections. They are not the end all be all, and change is the name of the game, but especially with COVID. And so we saw a significant number of areas where we were able to save dollars with COVID. We also saw additional expenses, but many savings came along with COVID as well. We also have new grant funds that we didn't know about when we first approved our budget. So we have ESSER funds and we have tier funds. And our ability to monitor these budgets throughout the year, and particularly like a mid-year budget review, allows us opportunities for cost reorganization, which is what we're going to go through tonight. So first we'll talk through some of the areas in which we saw savings. So the first few on this slide are due to COVID. So we had utility savings. We had a lot less need to heat our buildings to the same extent we would normally in the winter months. Transportation savings. We have in our contract with First Student, we have that we will pay First Student 50% for the non-service days. So even when our students are learning virtually, when they're not in person, we pay First Student 50%. And if you recall a year ago, we thought that maybe we would be back in the fall, and then it was maybe we'll be back in October, and then the metrics continued in the wrong direction, and we didn't go back fully some days a week until February. So that savings with transportation was real and significant within our budget. We also had fewer supplemental contracts, and this is for the school clubs and organizations within their regular functions. Many of them were still able to run, but we certainly did not have as many as we would have had in any normal given year. We also had, anytime staff member left in late summer or early fall, we hired on an as-needed basis, because it was at this point that we realized that our enrollment was definitely down from where we had planned. And so our class sizes were much smaller than normal. And so we kind of did an analysis each and every time somebody left us to see, did we need to hire that position now? Is it hire them now? Is it hire them when we come back in person in some regard? And so we saw cost savings there. We also implemented a new system. We built a new system that allowed us to track benefits for staff. So when we plan for staff, we have to plan for a new staff member to take a family benefits plan, which is about $25,000. If we have 4 people who don't take any benefits, that's $100,000 in savings, which adds up quickly. So we were able to kind of build a system with school services, who helps us monitor staffing, and with HR, and we now are able to track who we budgeted for at family plans and what they actually took. So that live kind of tracking allows us to understand where we're at in terms of benefits before the year is up. Another significant part of our cost savings was our utilization of our previous AGR carryover. So we've talked a lot about our AGR budget moving forward and how we have a new kind of philosophy on not just having coaches within AGR, but also having teachers and that 18-to-1 class size within AGR. Well, previously we had underspent our AGR dollars throughout the years, and that added to a large carryover of AGR, which was sitting in a restricted fund balance. So those dollars are meant to be used in our classrooms in one way or another, and they were sitting in fund balance. So we were able to, in an odd way, due to COVID, take some of our classrooms who were under 18-to-1 or 18-to-1 or less, and take those teachers who were funded within our general operating fund in Fund 10, and move those expenses onto the AGR grant to utilize this carryover. So it was kind of a one-time utilization of the carryover without getting ourselves in a hole that wasn't sustainable. If we were to do this in a regular year, we would have staffing, we would have additional staffing one year and then have to get rid of that staff the next year. So in an odd way, it was kind of a benefit in disguise to be able to utilize our AGR carryover due to our low class sizes with COVID. And that was a significant portion of our savings this year. Fund 27 maintenance of effort strategy. super high level with it. So maintenance of effort, big picture, is that we have to spend the same amount or less in Fund 27 state and local costs each year, unless you have exceptions. And exceptions can make you bring down that standard for maintenance of effort each year. And one of those exceptions is having fewer special ed students enrolled in your special ed programming, which we saw a significant drop due to COVID this year, much more than any normal year. So because we have that lower threshold, we can move funds from our state and local Fund 27 expenses onto a federal Fund 27 or special ed grant, the flow-through grant, thus reducing or lowering that maintenance of effort threshold, ultimately freeing up dollars within our Fund 10 budget. Because our transfer each year from Fund 10 to Fund 27 to bring the expenses to match Fund 27 revenue, the transfer is a little bit less this year because we were able to move some of those state and local Fund 27 costs onto the federal flow-through grant. So after running through these various cost-saving areas, we were able to make room for purchases this year that we otherwise would have had to support in future budget years. So the curriculum adoptions that we just talked through, instead of having to make room for them next year, they'll all be supported very easily within this year's budget, which is why Leadership and Learning has been working like wild, crazy people to get all of these adoptions in this year. So just amazing work, and it goes back to understanding our budget earlier-ish in the process rather than just year-end to have some time to plan for these other expenses. We also had additional CIP projects that we were able to complete this year. So each year our CIP budget to keep our buildings the minimum amount that we need for our CIP projects or capital improvement projects is about $1.2 million. Our Nathan Hale parking lot project was about $1 million. So we could only fill in a few remaining projects, but with our additional savings here, we were able to do roofs at a few, 4 different schools. We had a number of floor replacements. We did an aquaponics lab at Key. So facilities was definitely busy and excited to be able to utilize additional dollars to do some of those CIP projects that would have been in future budgets. We also were able to upgrade our phone system. So our current phone system is a digital phone, and it's an outdated system. So the VoIP system is what most school districts around us use. And our phone system was about to no longer be supported. So if there were issues, we'd have to kind of figure it out on our own. So we were going to move to VoIP in the near future, and we're able to do so this year. So again, that's a couple $100,000 in hardware that we were able to purchase this year rather than trying to fit in future budgets. We also were able to purchase a firewall. I think that was about $175,000 expense. Again, that would have been in a future year expense. Able to purchase it this year. And then finally, we have tech leases that are part of our normal operating budget. So those are when we have teacher computer refreshes, or we have student iPads or student computers or CAD machines. Those are on our annual leases, and those are, we're investigating to see if there's any prepayment penalty. I don't believe there will be. And if not, then we can pay them this year with current funds. And then we also won't have the principal payments going forward, but then we also would just save those interest costs, which isn't like a ton. I want to say it's probably between $25,000 and $50,000. So in the grand scheme of things, not huge, but still a very important cost-saving measure. If we can do it, we will. So we have our business office is currently working on investigating if we're able to prepay our current tech leases. And I have a note that teamwork makes the dream work, because it takes a lot of work to be able to kind of see where we're at budget-wise, but then a whole lot of work in all of our other areas and departments to be able to kind of make these things come to fruition with the dollars that we have. So just a huge shout out to the team. So what are the actual dollars that we're talking about? We have a remaining additional surplus of about 5% of our budget, or about $6 million. And so we are in a position to long-term plan, and we have a few strategic options what we can do with these first that we'll talk through is a Fund 46, a capital improvement fund. And we have opened a Fund 46, we opened it in 2017. A Fund 46 has a 5-year time clock starting the time that we open it. And at the time that it's open, the board approves a plan that is associated with these funds. So our plan was a turf field replacement fund, which we put every year from Fund 10 to Fund 46, a transfer of $325,000 to stay on track with our turf field replacement fund. What we can do at any time is take that language that we currently have and expand it to additional needs. So we have a regular CIP budget, CIP list, and what we could do is expand the language to support those additional CIP needs. Basically, those $1.2 million that we spend minimum each year on CIP, we could just expand our Fund 46 rather than just the turf fields. We could have our CIP list on there as well, which would mean if we transfer funds with this surplus from Fund 10 to Fund 46, we could use it on our turf field replacement fund. We could use it to either replace the $1.2 million. So if we have a tight budget year, we could just not budget $1.2 million for CIP needs and instead use this transfer. We could utilize it instead of budgeting that $325,000 each year to keep up with our turf field replacements. We could utilize this surplus that we would be transferring to Fund 46. So a few options. The main point is both of which help us long-term plan and reduce the need for future expenses. The next big one that we'll talk through tonight, the other big one that we'll talk through tonight is retirement costs. So what we could do with the surplus in addition to the Fund 46 transfer is commit costs within fund balance. So ultimately, these committed fund balance funds then would be utilized for a current retirement system or a revamped system. And a revamped system could mean, if we go this route, that we would have 2 systems running at the same time for some time, which is a significant upfront cost, but ultimately results in long-term savings. And what a revamped system could look like could be rather than a defined benefit plan, we're on a defined benefit as we stand right now. So a teacher or an EA or a staff member who retires has a defined benefit of health insurance for X amount of years, life insurance, dental, etc. We could move to a defined benefit plan where our district puts in X number of dollars into a health reimbursement arrangement or an HRA funded for each individual staff member. And there could be the same criteria, or the criteria could change for who's eligible in terms of years of service and age for a retirement, for that retirement package. And that would be a defined benefit. So it would be much more, it would be more sustainable on our end and also just easier to budget and manage throughout the years. Our current annual retirement costs are about $4.2 million each year. And we would work, it would really be a whole year-long process, but we would work with National Insurance Services. We would work with an actuary to understand how much we would have to budget going forward, and also simultaneously if we did this changeover at any point in time. What is needed for committing fund balance is just board approval. So it'd be board approval for a designated purpose, and that would be retirement costs if that's the route we go. And the board could take action to, at any time in the future, to uncommit these funds as well. So it's not like we're held feet to the fire or anything. If we need to or just want to uncommit the funds from fund balance, we could do that as well. So it's really kind of a risk-free venture. And then why would we commit funds in fund balance instead of just adding funds to fund balance? Committing the funds in fund balance demonstrates a planned usage of fund balance. So we purposely got our fund balance after many years of hard work back up to the level where it's at right now, which allows us to avoid short-term borrowing. But it's not necessarily a good look for school districts to just keep compiling their fund balance unless you have a planned, a committed use of those funds. And especially I think right now legislators are like really highly looking at school districts' fund balances to make sure that I think there's a misconception that school districts are making out started with COVID, which isn't necessarily the case. And so committing these funds into fund balance demonstrates that we have a planned use for these funds.
And that's good toward our credit? Or just like audit purpose?
Yep, I mean, I would say all around, it shows that we're being fiscally responsible.
He shook his head, I don't know.
It's more so to show the public that we're trying to plan ahead. We're not just looking at today, we're looking at tomorrow, 10 years from now. That's what I would point at if, from doing it from that perspective. It may help with the audit too, but at the end of the day, we're through the problems, and now we need to make sure we don't get into future problems.
Sounds good. Thank you for that.
And that benefit of revamping a retirement system, well, struggle is it's gonna take significant costs up front. So we have this unique opportunity right now to commit these funds to fund balance. We also can commit funds that are already in fund balance. So it's not like just the new surplus funds have to be committed. We could commit some of the funds that are already in fund balance. And we could do that at any time too. Yeah. And then so that was a challenge, but the benefit going forward is that this is one of our largest areas of costs that we have the ability to control and to change going forward. Also, one of the stickiest, messiest, most sensitive areas, buckets of funds, which I'm well aware of. So, just putting that up. So what is the impact on the mill rate and the budget for both of these? Both of them would reduce funding needed for future expenses. The mill rate is different for each one. So our current mill rate is $8.75, and next year the projected range is $8.05 to $8.21. So the highest mill rate that we would see would still be a drop of 50 cents. A transfer to Fund 46, so that first one we looked at for the capital improvements, would result in a lower mill rate, so the lower end of that range. And committing funds to fund balance would result in the higher end of that range. And I put that graph up there just to remind us that we are currently lower than we've been in the last decade in terms of mill rate. And I have one more point on this is that this is a balance of both controlling the mill rate, but also what's best for managing our long-term costs. I think we have to keep both in mind as we make a decision moving forward. So our recommendation is kind of a split, and sort of in proportion to the amount of these costs are within our budget. So we have a recommendation of $2 million to Fund 46 fund balance and $4 million to committed fund balance for retirement benefits. And at this time, we would look for additional comments or conversations, suggestions, recommendations from the board.
Do we know, because I'm a firm believer that we need to start looking at the retirement benefits and what we need to, and how we can get better control of that for the future. Do we know kind of what that upfront cost would be? Is that $4 million going to be sufficient to really get that process started, I guess?
That's a good question. I can't even give you a ballpark. I guess my ballpark might be 10 to 20 million, 10 million maybe. I don't even want to put that on the record because I'm completely ballparking it.
I wrote it down. Sorry.
Yeah, we're holding you to it.
It's more than $4 million. I'm assuming, and we do have. I think we have wiggle room in our current fund balance too to commit additional funds if we wanted to go down that route as well, at really any point in time. But that is something that I can work on with National Insurance Services to just get kind of a starting point. Like, what does this even look like? Just if we start going down this road.
Yeah, I think either way, and it's important to kind of understand that. But I think either way, it's an important step that we need to take because again, I think long term. Like you said, that's a cost that we have the most control over, and we need to start making, I feel that we need to start taking those steps to get that under control and make those changes. So.
Other questions?
With that particular question, I'm just jumping online quick, trying to remember the Shorewood went through this transition, and I inherited that process when I worked in Shorewood, and they passed a referendum in the community and I think it was around $10 million to manage the kind of funding the dual system over time. And so ours would be likely larger than that, I would imagine. And it was a process then of what I inherited with the business manager, a lot of meetings similar to the compensation committee, because you essentially have to kind of do cut scores, so to speak, if you want to put it in education terms of there's any retiree stays in this current system, right? We have that obligation to them. Then there's going to be a group of employees that will grandfather into the current benefit, right? So then there's a group where you need to make a whole bunch of catch-up payments in the HRA, because now the promise of the healthcare benefit is gone. The promise is now money that you can use to pay for healthcare, right? So there's a whole chunk that has to get invested in pretty heavily. Then there's probably another layer that's a little bit less, and then there's the group of new employees where there'll be a little bit of catch-up, and then there's the annual contributions going forward. Is how that system gets designed. Where you draw those lines gets to be the challenging part, because anytime you draw a line, somebody feels like they're getting left out. But I think it's a smart move. I like this recommendation that we start committing some dollars to that, because if we don't, we'll never get there. You know, a board 10 years from now will have the same conversation. And so we have an opportunity right now to at least take a step towards getting that kind of system in place.
So I wouldn't be in favor of this if we weren't putting the $4 million towards revamping the retirement. If we were to say we're gonna put it towards retirement expenses, I don't think that helps us in the long term, because the cost is only going to increase, barring some major shifts in how healthcare is run. And so I think by putting that $4 million specifically towards a revamping of the retirement benefits in our district, I would be in favor of this from that perspective, and the $2 million towards Fund 46. Now that we're nearing the end of the compensation plan, this is, to me, the other half of that thing that needs to happen. Caitlin has said multiple times we are the richest district in the state of Wisconsin regarding our retirement benefits, which is great. However, it's not sustainable for us long term. And we have to look at the long-term viability of our district in that regard. Another thing that I wanted to mention regarding these two options, we discussed it in our committee a little bit today. So Fund 46 is a fund that it shields us from having to basically look at the money in Fund 46 as a revenue from a state perspective. And so the money in Fund 46 doesn't affect how much money we can get from the state and those benefits. And that's why the mill rate is less affected by having money in Fund 46 versus identifying it in the actual, Fund 10 essentially is even just saying, well, we're gonna use it for this, but the state's still gonna look at it as revenue, and that could affect our funding formula. But we're in a good spot to do that now, because even with that, our mill rate is still going down. And so it's less likely to cause angst in the community for us doing that versus, a few years back when we had OPB and things like that, jacking up our mill rate quite a bit. There is another option for the retirement piece. There's a specific fund for that, which is a Fund 73. Which I guess used to have, but we got rid of because it was very onerous to keep up with the requirements for that Fund 73. But it's in the same category as Fund 46 as far as it's not looked at as revenue in that regard. And that's something that Caitlin is gonna get our ducks in a row. So if we come to a point where we're looking at mill rates going up for some reason, and we're still trying to put money towards this retirement plan, if we need to shift things to Fund 73, we'll at least know everything that's involved in that. It may involve hiring somebody just to manage that one fund, but it's something that I think is important to understand from our perspective, because there are other ways to try and save the money without it affecting our mill rate in this way. So are you looking for?
So next week, we will do an approval of the budget amendments. So looking for what we want to indicate in that budget approval for this $6 million. So that's split between Fund 46 and committing to fund balance, or however that looks.
So basically, is everybody in favor of the recommendation that was put forth? For the most part.
Thumbs up? So, the recommendation, fund balance for retirement
Right there.
benefits. So the question I would have is that enough? Or do we need to say for retirement benefits revamp? Or is it okay to say it this way and we can still do that? Like, 'cause for me, it's for the revamp. It's not just to pay for retirement benefits. That's me personally. I don't know
And
how
I
other
would
people
agree
feel.
with that.
We can utilize the restricted fund, or not restricted, committed fund balance, whenever, and it would be part of our budget conversations moving forward. So like, we wouldn't just plan to use that 4 million to substitute the regular 4 million that's in our budget. That would be a board conversation. So I don't think it has to be that specific. I think
Gotcha.
retirement benefits suffices for the need and, maybe doesn't cause undue
Revamp is
stress.
very stressful.
Yeah, that's
Concern.
true. Revamp
Well, I just
is
wanna
a-
make sure that, well, you only said retirement benefits, and so we used it for this. You know,
Based on the look around the room, and that's just basing it on the look, I think everybody's more or less on the same page, unless I'm misreading things.
all right, so are we good with the split? Thumbs up, thumbs down on the split of $2 million for Fund 46, $4 million towards retirement.
I think we're all on
So
the
it's
same
all
page.
thumbs up.
Okay, cool. So then what will happen is next week, we will come forward with that budget approval. It's in a standard DPI format, and then following the budget amendment approval, it's published in the newspaper per regular state statutes. And then, going forward, we will commit the fund balance for the designated purpose, so for retirement benefits at an upcoming meeting, so that'll be another action item. And then going forward, at some point in the future, we will have additional discussion and then approval of the expanded use of Fund 46, so it's not just the turf field, and we expand it to our CIP.
How much money do we have in there for the turf field?
I did not have that in my head. I knew
I'm just
someone
curious,
asked
like,
that.
and do we have any idea of when we potentially would be looking to replace it? I mean, is this just
Oh, we
money
said
that-
10 years, I thought it was.
2022, I believe, is the first year that a replacement, that's the first year we can use Fund 46 because the 5-year clock is up. And I believe that's the first year field is ready to go. We have been funding it per the schedule and actually we're at. So,
So it should be
I'll
around
I'll put
$1
it in my board
We're
update
over
for
a million,
Wednesday.
I think. I think we're over $1 million now.
Well, I gotta believe that turf is not quite as, well, maybe now with supplies, it might be a different story.
Put it into
But
the
prior
science
to this, I
curriculum.
gotta believe turf has come a long way as far as expense, and just replacing the turf is probably not gonna be what we originally thought it was gonna be.
I have no idea.
I have no clue.
I go home tonight and look at
Well,
turf.
And who evaluates that? Or is there like someone who comes out independently and says, oh, this field is garbage, or this field's got 2 more years? Like, how do we,
buy it
who does
from-
that? Yeah.
Yeah,
What kind of
so
Jeff
support?
would tell us.
we
Not-
recently had it fluffed, just a month or 2 ago. And it's that same company then that would, like, they told us our fields they should have been replaced already.
Oh, really?
Mhm.
Oh.
I mean, also, this is a salesman talking, so it's like.
That's what I meant. I want independent, not someone who's like
Yeah.
buying a field
Well,
from
we
you.
have, I mean, I have some connections. Like, I mean, this is stuff I'm into, so
Okay.
we can.
I would like an independent evaluation of fields, not the guy who's gonna sell me my next field. I
Yeah.
want the person
A really
who's
close
into
friend
like,
of mine is building a new turf facility in Oconomowoc, and, I mean, he's got connections and. so
cause
I'm
we want it to be
assuming-
safe, right? And, you know, and all that sort of stuff, but yeah, sure, $10 million, sure, I'll give you another field or whatever, you know.
No, it's
Can we
not-
get the
I
Billy
don't think
Ustrom
it'll be
deal?
$1 million.
Yeah.
No?
No.
I mean, that'd be good,
I don't
cause
think
we were banking
There's
on $1
not gonna
million.
be a lot of extra things you gotta do other than just.
Take
turf.
care. Yeah.
Because it's all graded, it's all,
Oh.
everything's done, so the turf,
There are a few things, like there's one, I don't even know what it is, but something that's like sticking up out of the ground, that shouldn't be, so like there's gonna have to be a little bit of movement with that.
Still.
We've talked about the sand pit too, the sand pit, I don't know the details, I should not talk about it, cause I don't know the details, but something with the sand pit is not in the right spot, it was, that might need to be moved as well, so Steve Eichmann knows all the details on that. I'll put that in my board update.
Yeah. Maybe reach out to Steve, Bill, and
with that money, you could probably turf football field and 2 baseball fields, which
I
would
think-
probably we originally thought was the cost of the football field, is what I think. Aside from, you know, the cost of goods and labor and stuff being way out of whack.
Any other questions about the budget amendment?
Nice
If-
job on everything.
Thank you, and thanks for hanging in there.
Yeah, thank you so much, Caitlin,
Yeah,
as
and-
always.
And congratulations from your honor from Wasbo.
Thank
Oh,
you.
yeah, congratulations. I just think it's awesome that we're able to do this kind of forward-thinking stuff now
Proactive.
when.
This is the fun part, you know,
Yeah.
it's like, we don't get to do this all the time, so.
Exactly.
Proactive. And I
Stark
love the mill
difference.
rate going down because what we're probably gonna be working towards is 10 years. we're
So,
at the
yeah,
lowest
so
that we've
soon
ever
it's
been.
like, okay, so at what point do we start talking about, where does it go, like, on this graph, like, you know, like the facilities study and
Yeah.
Well,
it's,
just-
you know,
yeah,
it makes it
exactly.
easier to start
Facility
having that
studies.
conversation,
Yeah.
that's for sure.
Right.
We're doing our part.
As much as we can, for sure.
All right.
All right, well, if there are no other questions, then we are adjourned. No, not for a workshop.
That's right, that's right.